Yeah, buddy, here we are. We're back. Here we are. We're doing it. We're going to be painting again. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for watching. We're going to be watching a little Warhammer while we paint. I think we're only going to be painting 2 Termagants today, you guys. Keep it a little bit shorter. 3 last week was a little much. We're trying to cut down the streams to maybe like 2 hours. So we're going to try to go with, we should probably just do 1, but we're going to go with 2. And we'll see how far we get in 2 hours. All right, you guys. Whoop. Yeah, we're going to be watching some Warhammer. Hope you guys are doing good. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Hope you guys had a good weekend and having a good week. Let's get that Warhammer started. So this video, this one's called, let's see what it's called. 10 most powerful factions in Warhammer 40k lore, you guys. We'll see what the most powerful is. We'll kill the music for right now. Whoops. Ubi, what's up, bro? Here we are, bro. We're chilling, man. We're going to be painting our little 40k homies today. We're only going to be painting 2 of them, and hopefully we'll be done in 2 hours. But you know how that goes. I keep saying that, but over and over, it turns into like a 3 hour and a half stream. All right, but that's all right. No worries. It's all good. Actually, let me set up the show first. So this is the video called 10 most powerful factions in Warhammer 40k lore. So that's what these things are from, 40k Warhammer. Good stuff. Bella Truth, hello. Here we are. We're doing it. We're going to be tossing on the show. I'll put the video sound on so you guys can hear what's going on. And I'm going to turn the cameras and we're going to get started here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching.
Warhammer 40k is one of the most ridiculous fictional universes ever created. Every single faction seems to be god tier, and it's absolutely baffling why they haven't completely destroyed the universe yet. From giant alien space dinosaurs that literally consume every living thing on a planet and then pop out infinite more dinosaurs, to ancient alien undead robots that have weapons designed to kill gods. Or how about the forces of humanity that may just be regular people at the end of the day, but when you have little regard for human life and can throw millions of soldiers at a problem until it goes away, you're definitely gonna rank pretty high on the power tier. But if every single faction is this ridiculous, who is the strongest? Who has the best chance at dominating the entire galaxy? Well, that's what we're going to figure out today as we dive into the 10 most ridiculous and powerful Warhammer factions in existence. And stick around to the end of the video because there's going to be a bonus segment that helps clarify this list and gives you a real good picture of what this galaxy actually looks like. And although this is meant to be a standalone video, it's technically a part 2, as the video I made right before this one covered 10 more factions that didn't quite make the cut. So if you don't see your favorites here, they were probably mentioned in the previous one.
Better.
And before we get started, I've actually hit a massive milestone as a YouTuber. I've got my very first YouTube sponsor and I'm super proud of myself. So that being said, this week's video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. And first off, a huge congratulations to Raid, as apparently all this treasure will be waiting for you right here. And since it's Raid's birthday, the gifts keep coming. All new and existing players can get a bunch of free gifts that are worth more than $25. Once you're in game, after clicking on the links, just enter the promo code 3YEARSRAID to get your hands on everything. And it's that easy. Just click the link in the description and I'll see you in game.
Check that out.
Okay, let's get this video started with number 10, the Tau Empire. So the really interesting thing about the Tau is that they're actually the youngest race in the galaxy. But despite not having been around for as long as the other factions, their technological advancement rates are downright supernatural. You see, they only discovered fire some 3,000 years ago, and yet now they maintain a galactic presence, and with each new sphere expansion, they conquer more territory.
Damn,
and without getting into the motivations of their leaders, because there may or may not be some shady stuff happening there, but the Tau people themselves, honest to God, seem like the closest thing to actual good guys in the 40k franchise. They all collectively believe in this thing known as the greater good, which is basically a creed that states to do the most good for the most people with every action that you take. Now, don't get it twisted, the Tau definitely aren't perfect. They utilize a pretty rigid caste system, and a lot of the times the do the most good for the most people thing kind of boils down to doing the most good for the Tau Empire. Now, it's definitely true that they value peace and diplomacy far more than any other faction in the grim darkness of the far future. But their expansion requires compliance. So the Tau will basically give a new species 100 different opportunities to join their empire, but at the end of the day, if they still refuse them, let's just say the Tau don't take no for an answer. However, despite the Tau's ruthless technological advancements and their unbelievable progression rate, they're still a relatively small faction. Now, they are an entire empire, so they're going to rank a little bit higher than smaller factions like the Grey Knights or the Sisters, but in the grand scheme of things like the Orcs or the Imperium, they still have a lot of growing to do. And the Tau fleets are undeniably powerful, but one of their major weaknesses is they still haven't mastered faster than light travel. So when they're expanding into new territory, it's comparatively slow when you look at other species that utilize the warp. Now don't get me wrong, not having to rely on the warp to travel through space does have its benefits. It's definitely far safer than going through hell itself. But it is comparatively slower, so they haven't expanded quite as much as other factions. And additionally, considering the size of their empire right now, not being able to utilize the warp for travel or even move faster than the speed of light isn't actually that big of a deal for them. Now, all that being said, in the most recent Tau Sphere expansion, they were able to utilize the warp to travel. Let's just say it went really badly though. And they may or may not have accidentally created a new Chaos God. Now that's not 100% confirmed though, so we'll have to dive into that in another video. But let's just say they still have a lot of learning to do. Despite this, the Tau operate some of the most advanced technology in the galaxy, and at the moment still truly believe in peace and unity. However, due to their smaller numbers, it's unlikely they would win in an all-out war against many of the other factions. If they manage to survive to the year 50k, it's very likely that we would see them take the top spot. But at the present time, they unfortunately rank a little bit lower. In the number 9 slot, we have the Adeptus Custodes, also known as the 10,000. The Custodians are the royal guard of the God Emperor himself. Every single one of them is immortal and a hero in their own right. You can honestly think of them like an army of anime main characters. They're that ridiculous. They have complete mastery over every form of combat and are trained in every weapon style. In the novel False Gods, one Space Marine remarks that the Custodians fight like a pack of lions, each one being an absolute apex killer in their own right, whereas him and his battle brothers fight more like a pack of wolves, designed to be a unit first and foremost. Additionally, the equipment that the Custodians utilize is unbelievably powerful and valuable. They are given literally the best of the best. Not only is each one an absolute unit of an individual, but they are all incredibly intelligent as well, as a Custodian warrior must become a master of not only combat in all its forms, but in every conceivable path of education. They were the Emperor's royal bodyguards and had to be as close to his level intellectually as possible. And this is actually kind of difficult to comprehend because the Emperor at this point in time is literally considered a god. And having to be intelligent enough that you can hold a conversation with God himself is a monumentous accomplishment. And to be fair, they themselves don't consider him a god, and neither did much of humanity when they were originally created. But he was undeniably the greatest human being that ever lived. So honestly, from my perspective, that's still kind of badass. Now, the Custodians weren't just his royal bodyguards, they were also his closest friends. And the Emperor knew literally every single one of them by name. They conversed with him, consoled him, and in some instances even offered guidance to the Emperor. To be on the level of a living god, so much so that you can offer guidance to him, requires a mind like no other. It's stated in the lore that every single Custodian is so unbelievably valuable that the only way to actually put a price tag on them is to use entire worlds as the monetary sum. Each one stands around 10 feet tall and are so strong that it takes 15 normal men just to lift their spear. And if all of that is true, I bet you're wondering why they would be so low on the list. The only weakness the Custodes has is similar to other entries on this list, and that's their numbers. Even if they do currently maintain around 10,000 members, which isn't exactly confirmed, that still pales in comparison to even the Space Marines, as it is estimated that there are around 1,000 chapters, each with a cap of 1,000 members. And there's honestly probably far more than the Imperial records state, as not every single Space Marine chapter is what we call chapter compliant. So there's roughly as many Custodians as around 10 chapters of Space Marines. The second major thing here is that the Custodians had actually failed in their primary mission. They had allowed the Emperor to be mortally wounded by his son Horus. This would induce several thousand years of mourning, where the custodians basically stayed on holy terra, guarding and protecting the emperor's body from any would-be assassins. And it's unfair to say that during this period of time they were doing nothing, as they were pretty instrumental in ending the rule of George Van Dyer, not to mention standing guard over a vault of truly horrific relics. But unlike the other forces of the Imperium, they were no longer taking the fight directly to the enemy itself. However, in recent times this has changed, and the Legio Custodes has become the Adeptus Custodes, and they have set off to bring the fight to the enemies of mankind once again, and satiate their wrath in the blood of heretics. As a single army, they are no doubt the most powerful beings mankind has ever seen. However, they are but 10,000 compared to the million-plus Space Marines or even the 30 trillion active guardsmen. Now, that being stated, in a one-on-one fight, a custodian could probably beat just about anybody on this list, with the exception of maybe a knight. But compared to an entire empire of, say, the next entry on this list, they're not going to be able to hold their own.
Find what you love what you find. Only at Total Wine & More.
We got Marshalls.
In at number 8, we have the Craft World Eldar. In the 41st millennium, the Eldari Empire is in a fractious state. But of all the different Eldar factions, the Craft Worlds are by far the strongest. Not only are they all long-lived and disciplined warriors, but every single one of them is psychically gifted. And although the Psyker Scourge is becoming more commonplace in the 41st millennium, by human standards, Psykers are still pretty rare. So it's difficult to comprehend an entire species of people who are able to manipulate the warp. Now, the Eldar are long-lived but seldom born, and as such are a dying species. Although, that being said, it wasn't always like this for the Eldar, as after the War in Heaven 60 million years ago, they had the largest empire in the entire galaxy. However, millions of years of peace led to them getting kinda weird and experimental, and their hedonism eventually spawned a Chaos God, which destroyed their entire society overnight. Now, the Craft Worlders that we know today were individuals who at the time of the Great Apocalypse were aboard massive ships known as Craft Worlds.
Like,
you see, these ships are inconceivably enormous.
I feel like I shouldn't even
some being documented as being thousands of miles long.
I have the wet
you can think of them as mobile planets. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of different Craft Worlds, from the Craft World of Uthway or Baeltan, or even the Black Library that the Harlequins protect. But outside of these Craft Worlds, they really don't maintain much of a galactic presence. They haven't conquered a whole bunch of planets. So in terms of population, they kind of pale in comparison to something like the Imperium, which has 1 million worlds under its control. Now, that being said, compared to humans, the Eldar live impossibly long lives, many of which are thousands of years old. And originally, upon their death, they would be reborn like a phoenix. However, that ability has long since been lost to them, as nowadays, as soon as they die, their soul is devoured by Slaanesh. Now, the Craft Worlders are able to protect themselves using a series of stones known as Soul Stones, which capture their psychic energy of their soul as soon as they die. The Craft Worlders are then able to plug these stones into what is known as the Infinity Circuit, which allows the souls of the Eldar departed to basically live forever in the confines of their ships. Meaning that the destruction of a single Craft World is not just the loss of their home, but of all of their ancestors as well. And these spirits are capable of offering more than just guidance, as they can be plugged into what are known as Wraith constructs, which you can think of like an Eldar Dreadnought. It's a machine constructed entirely of a substance known as Wraithbone, and the soul of the departed Eldar is able to take full control over it. Now, these things are actually pretty controversial to a lot of Eldari, because they are undoubtedly effective in war, but on the other hand, a lot of them see this as basically necromancy, and that they're not allowing the souls of the departed to finally rest, and instead forcing them back onto the battlefield. Probably one of the most useful things that the Eldar have access to is a parallel dimension known as the Webway. It's a pocket dimension that exists between the physical universe and the immaterium. It's infinite corridors spread out like roots across the entire galaxy, and it offers a much faster and safer way of travel than utilizing the warp. However, in spite of their undeniable power and abilities, they are still a dying empire. The Eldar death rate far outpaces its birth rate, and despite the fact that the Eldari of the Craft Worlds are undoubtedly one of the major players in the galaxy right now, unless something major changes, they are a species that is doomed for inevitable extinction. In the number 7 slot, we have the Adeptus Mechanicus. So the Adeptus Mechanicus is a faction of machine-worshipping cultists. They pray to the machine god in order to create and maintain all of the marvels of engineering that humanity is capable of. From the humble las rifle to the Gloriana-class battlecruisers, the Adeptus Mechanicus is responsible for all of them. Now, mostly known for the Forge World of Mars, where the Mechanicum originated, they actually control many planets, each known as a Forge World, as the entire thing is basically a giant factory, every square inch of it dedicated to the production of the Imperium's tools of war. Now, to say they control one of the greatest armories of all time is a massive understatement, and each individual member of the Mechanicum is also incredibly intelligent, as they see the pursuit of knowledge as a holy quest, that logic is divine, and there is nothing more holy than calculations. They see flesh as weakness, and thus ritualistically replace more and more of their organic parts with the sanctified metal of their creations. Many of the Mechanicum's individuals no longer even look remotely human. The only thing left that holds them to their origins is potentially a few leftover organs so they can still maintain the moniker of humanity. However, there is a very important distinction to be made here. They do not want to be entirely machine, as thinking machines are forbidden. AI, or abominable intelligence as it is known, is blasphemy, and it spits directly in the face of the young Messiah. So many of their creations that are still capable of some form of thought have to have a human brain powering them. The vast majority of weaponry used by humanity can trace its origins back to the Mechanicum. They control massive fleets of warships, and not to mention the Titan legions as well. So they are undoubtedly one of the most powerful singular factions in all of humanity. But as far as weaknesses are concerned, they do have a couple. The first is that even though the Adeptus Mechanicus is normally seen as part of the Imperium, they do maintain independence and are allowed to operate as basically a free state. This is due to the signing of a document known as the Treaty of Mars. And at the end of the day, if their interests conflict with that of the Imperium's, they'll pursue their own first. Additionally, they are also ruthlessly addicted to tradition. Innovation is seen as heresy. Machines created by humanity at the peak of its power are seen as perfect in all their forms. So to improve upon perfection is blasphemy to their machine god. Now, in the novel Mechanicum, we see one of the main characters literally on death row for having committed the ultimate sin of trying to make her workshop goggles just a little bit better. Their superstitions and belief in machine spirits, the idea that every machine literally has a soul, may keep the machines they create functioning. However, they get in the way of making any form of actual progress. They're basically stuck in the Dark Ages and refuse to move forward. They do, however, have seemingly limitless resources in comparison to the Dark Mechanicum, and those materials will keep the fires of their forges burning for a long time to come. In the number 6 slot, we have the Chaos Space Marines. The 9 traitor legions of the Chaos Space Marines are Astartes that have figuratively and all too often literally sold their souls for power. They are dark and twisted wraiths that lurk deep within the space between universes. Their ranks include the rotting and undying forms of the Death Guard, the mighty and terrible arcane sorcerers of the Thousand Suns, the depraved lunatics of the Emperor's Children, and the frothing berserkers of the World Eaters, just to name a few. They are damned and lost souls who once served at the Emperor's side, but betrayed him and everything they ever knew to follow War Master Horus in his Great Rebellion. Now, after 9 years of brutal warfare, the traitor legions were inevitably pushed back and forced to take refuge in the bleeding wound in reality known as the Eye of Terror. There, time flows differently, and many of the traitors that besieged the Imperial Palace 10,000 years ago are still alive today. And to put that in perspective, the Loyalist Marines of the 41st millennium weren't alive back then. The Siege of Terror is all but a legend that has been passed down for several millennia. The traitor legions remember it far too well, as many of them were literally there. So the Chaos Space Marines are what you get when you take a superhuman warrior and then further empower them with the blessings of the Chaos Gods. They're basically an unholy unification of the peak of humanity's gene forging mixed with the arcane sorcery of the warp. Not to mention a whole lot of heresy and blasphemy thrown in for good measure. And on an individual level, a Chaos Space Marine is far stronger than their loyalist counterpart. However, as a cohesive fighting force, the inherent greed and selfishness of the Chaos Space Marines leaves a lot to be desired. And thus, the greatest weakness of Chaos is its lack of unity. The traitor legions fight amongst themselves more than they fight any of their other enemies. In the novel Black Legion, we see a gathering of Chaos Space Marines just outside the Eye of Terror, waiting for the new War Master of Chaos, Abaddon the Despoiler, before embarking through the rift into real space. When the War Master finally arrives, he is greeted with constant and non-stop battle, as old grudges and rivalries between the traitor warbands runs deep. And in retrospect, gathering them all in one place was sure to incite violence. This occurs for a few reasons. The first is that resources within the Eye of Terror are incredibly scarce. Now, in the novel Storm of Iron, we see Chaos Space Marines literally descending upon their recently deceased battle brothers like a pack of vultures, looking to scavenge anything they can from their corpses, whether that be bits of armor, ammunition, or even their weaponry. Everyone is out for themselves. It doesn't matter how powerful you are, if you can't stand united with your brothers and you're constantly expecting one of them to stab you in the back, this is a major weakness. that can be easily exploited by your enemy. Not to mention the fact that although the Traitor Marines are able to create new recruits, each warband doing so in their own unique way, their gene seed is incredibly unstable, as it has spent generations being corrupted by the warp. Now, on one hand, this can lead to some pretty interesting and useful mutations. However, it makes the implementation of their gene seed far more likely to encounter catastrophic consequences. Now, Abaddon the Despoiler seems to be the only one that's been able to unite the traitor legions for his Black Crusades. Even still, this is not perfect unity, warbands often breaking off to pursue their own interests despite his commands. Now, don't get it twisted. Don't mistake my words for evidence that they are not a threat to mankind, as the arch-enemy is getting stronger every day, as the Imperium of Man continues to fracture. And over time, they have been pushing further and further outside of the Eye of Terror and conquering new territory in real space. And recently, we've seen the 13th Black Crusade bear fruit, as Cadia was destroyed and the galaxy was split in half with the forming of the Cicatrix Maledicta, a festering wound that spreads from rim to galactic rim, plunging half of the Imperium into darkness. When the legions are able to set aside their differences for but a moment, calamity ensues. If they were ever to truly unite, the resulting carnage would be catastrophic. But right now, their lack of resources and territory fuel deep feuds, and old wounds and betrayals are never allowed to fully heal. Now, tied for the same spot, we have the Chaos Demons. And I'm going to add these two together as they're pretty intrinsically linked, and it's difficult to comprehend just how powerful demons are. As on one hand, which we're going to get into, they could be the most potentially dangerous faction in the entire galaxy, or the
remember
weakest.
yesterday I was telling you I'm not even like
100% honest. It's because this list was supposed to have 20 entries, and I'm just now realizing there's 21. So I'm going to fix that by adding demons and Chaos Space Marines together. And in my defense, this is exactly where they were going to go on the list anyway, so just think of them at like 5.5. So the Chaos Space Marines are unquestionably powerful individuals. They have been blessed by the Dark Gods and have reached power levels thought impossible by mortals. However, the true power of the Primordial Four rests not in the hands of mankind, but in their demonic servants. Every single demon is a twisted reflection of their paternal deity, and the Chaos Gods and their creations see the physical universe as little more than a diversion. The realm of the physical is but a massive board game to them, the Great Game, as they call it. Nurgle, Slaanesh, Tzeentch, and Khorne vie for dominance and see mortals as little more than pawns existing solely for their entertainment. Their corrupting influence spreads far and wide, and each one of them maintains armies of incredibly destructive potential, seemingly with limitless soldiers. If the two realms were to ever merge, and the infinite horrors of the warp were allowed to run free through our universe, mankind would quickly perish, and the universe would inevitably collapse in on itself. However, the denizens of the realm of chaos have a massive weakness, and that is that they can't maintain their presence in the physical realm for long periods of time. It normally takes a particularly powerful summoner, or a really egregious act of sustained blasphemy, to allow them to inhabit our realm. The gods do not see this as a problem, as what fun would a game be without limitations? Nevertheless, demons, or the Neverborn as they're often referred to as, make for incredibly potent allies, and when summoned into battle, they'll wreak untold havoc upon the Imperium of Man and any alien force that would dare impede the pursuits of the forces of chaos. So each one of the four gods has different strengths and weaknesses and are radically different from their siblings. And when they actually manage to set aside their differences and unite, they can create some truly unstoppable armies. You see, the forces of the Blood God are massive and hulking melee monsters. They are literally the personification of violence, whereas the forces of Tzeentch are all masters of the arcane and excel in ranged warfare. The demons of Nurgle, however, are incredibly resilient, and each one being ludicrously difficult to put down. Not to mention his armies carry with them demonic plagues that were never meant for our universe. The forces of Slaanesh are as beautiful as they are cruel, and their agility is unmatched by any force in the physical universe.
A little bit when I brush things. Is it because my brush
you can think
is
of
like,
the united demon army as having four major factors: strength, toughness, speed, and magic. And when they all come together, they make for an incredibly dangerous force. There's just one major problem here. The four gods are not united,
I am using the cheap
and war
ones,
against each other more than anyone else. Something like 99% of all battles that the demons fight in takes place in the realm of chaos, rather than the physical universe.
Just in case I ruin them way too
quick, strong enough to hold them back within the warp.
The
but in reality, he's holding back four individuals that are locked in eternal conflict with each other. If they were somehow able to unite, they would quite literally overpower him. And additionally, if they manage to not become completely dependent on their mortal followers to help them manifest in our universe, they would be by far the most powerful army to have ever existed. Now, thankfully for us, this is not the case, and demons rarely ever unite. It's not like this doesn't happen, as it has in the past, but normally it's for a very limited amount of time, sometimes being even far less time than they're able to exist in our universe. So that is why it's kind of difficult to quantify just how powerful the Neverborn truly are. But one thing is for sure, they are undeniably one of the strongest forces in the universe. They just have a few major weaknesses that hold them back from the #1 spot.
Sometimes you just need a moment. Nature-made gummy vitamins. Self-care made easy.
We hit a commercial, you guys. As soon as we're back, I'll put the audio back. We're still painting. We're still doing it. This guy's getting a second coat. Yeah, dude, I thin my paint way too much. It's something I got to get better on. Not thinning my paint so much. Well, dude, I get all paranoid that my thing is going to be covering up the detail, and then I messed it up, and you know how it goes. You know how it goes. Oh, hit next at least. We're back.
And coming in at number 5, we have the Adeptus Astartes. Okay, so there's a lot to say about Space Marines, as they make up something like 80% of all Warhammer lore. But in the interest of being fair, we're going to stick to the basics here. They are the poster children for Warhammer 40k, potentially its most iconic warriors. They are transhuman super soldiers, clad in ceramite power armor, each having undergone relentless and rigorous gene therapy and augmentative surgeries, from the time they were children to become the ultimate warriors. They are the Imperium's mass-produced super soldiers, and each one is given upgrades such as a third lung or a second heart, a mechanism that allows them to heal from pretty much any injury, or even the ability to spit acid. And they get so much more ridiculous than that. They have one that lets them consume the flesh of their enemy and learn all of their secrets. Another one that puts them into a coma if their injuries are so catastrophic that there's no way that they can heal from them, which will basically keep them alive long enough for an apothecary to get to them. And if their injuries are too great for even that of the apothecaries, it's possible that Space Marine will be entombed in a dreadnought, a walking life support tank, basically an iron lung with machine gun hands. And in this way, they'll be able to serve the Emperor indefinitely. The Space Marines are so far removed from normal humans that it's actually really difficult for them to relate to us, as a Space Marine can process information 100 times faster, and they're practically immortal. We know now that they do age, but just incredibly slowly. The oldest Space Marine on record, Dantiok, having been well over 3,000 years old. And as of the time of this recording, we've never actually seen a Space Marine die from old age, so we don't really know how old they can get. Most Space Marines will end up perishing in the line of duty somewhere between 200 and 400 years into their service. Now, the Space Marines were originally divided into 20 different legions, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, such as the Ultramarines, the Space Marines Master Tacticians. And depending on who you ask, the greatest Space Marines that ever lived, who are capable of doing literally everything. There were the Space Wolves, Space Marine Vikings that rode giant wolves into battle and acted as the Emperor's executioners. There was also the Imperial Fists, whose fortresses were said to be completely impenetrable.
Too much, dude.
Or even the Raven Guard, who somehow managed to make 8-foot-tall super soldiers in 1,000-pound ceramite armor incredibly stealthy, seemingly able to disappear without a trace and make no sound with every step they took. These are only a couple of the great legions that made up the Space Marine forces. And although all the Space Marines ultimately served the Emperor, each one of them was led by what was known as a Primarch. This was one of the Emperor's 20 sons, a demigod-level individual and some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The gene seed used to create their warriors was pulled directly from each of the Primarchs, making each of the Primarchs a figurative and semi-literal father figure to the Space Marines. Nowadays, however, the legions are no more, and the vast majority of the Primarchs are either dead or missing. Space Marines are now divided into chapters of no more than 1,000 individuals at any given time. Now, even though this is supposed to be a hard and fast rule, there's a lot of chapters out there that kind of conveniently ignore this requirement. Now, it's difficult to put into perspective just how many Space Marines are out there, but it is estimated to be somewhere around 1 million.
And also
although the actual number may be far higher, as we don't have accurate numbers for all of the chapters.
10 most powerful
Even
factions
still,
in
the Space
Warhammer
Marines are one of the
40k
greatest
lore,
fighting forces at mankind's disposal,
45
seemingly able
minutes
to counter
long,
any
and a little
strategy
past
the enemy may
halfway.
throw at them. So I know what you're thinking.
I am
here.
using a wet
If
palette.
the Loyalist and Traitor Space
I'm
Marines
using
are
a wet
genetically
palette,
similar to
and
one
yeah,
another,
I'm just thinning my
but
stuff
one of
out
them has been
a
empowered by the Chaos
little too
Gods,
much.
then why do the Loyalists actually rank higher? And it's something I've referred to in this video series with a couple of different factions, but the number one thing is unity. You see, Loyalist Marines
There's
can
another
count
one
on
that
their
we're gonna
brothers to
watch
have their
after
backs,
this.
and whether that be members of their
If we're
own
still
chapter
doing
or
stuff,
reinforcements from other chapters, they
hopefully
can
we'll be
all
done by
work
the
together to
end of the
accomplish
other
certain
one.
goals. Chaos
Depends
Space
how
Marines
far
are
we go.
inherently selfish. Each
We're
one of them
chilling,
pretty
we're
much
all-
out
we're
for
all right
themselves
right now.
above everything else. And yeah, Loyalist Marines may have long-standing grudges between chapters, such as that between the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves, but Chaos Space Marines actively hate each other. One pretty interesting example of this can be found in the 8th edition Death Guard Codex, where it says that they do not view the forces of the Imperium as some great enemy. They just view them as ignorant and deeply misguided. And one day, the Death Guard will show them the error of their ways, and they will be joined together in unity when it comes to worshipping the Grandfather. However, they actively hate the Thousand Sons, as the Thousand Sons know the primordial truth of the universe, yet still choose to follow Magnus. Loyalist Astartes fight like a unified force, whereas the Chaos Space Marines are, for lack of better words, chaotic, which may cause them to be a very difficult enemy to fight as you never really know what you're up against. But in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, knowing that you actually have brothers that you can rely on is one of the greatest strengths you can ask for. In at number 4, we have the
I gotta keep reminding
Astra
myself to
So the
slap it on
Imperial
there,
Guard
just
doesn't
slap it
get
on there,
nearly
just
enough
slap it
credit,
on there,
and
just
I
slap
know
it
there's
on there.
definitely going to be someone in the
Space
comment
Wolves,
section
yeah,
that is
dude.
completely baffled that I would rank them higher than their beloved Ultramarines. But the fact of the matter is that more than 80% of the Imperium's fighting is done by the regular old men and women of the Astra Militarum. The Imperium is made up of many different types of warriors, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, and that's honestly its
Especially since
biggest
it's the
strength.
base paint,
However,
the base
none are more
coat.
prevalent than that of the
Slap it on
Imperial
there, just
Guard.
slap it on
And I
there.
know the majority of the 40k novels tend to focus on Space Marines or other such individuals clad in power armor, but the reality is that the universe is an incredibly large place, and the forces of the Space Marines or the Custodians just can't be everywhere all at once. So the Space Marines tend to act more like a supplement to the main force that is the Guard. It's honestly difficult to wrap your head around just how large the Astra Militarum truly is. They control vast legions of earth-shattering tanks and artillery, and seemingly infinite supplies of human fighters that drown out their enemy in wave after wave, sent in to crush all those that would stand in the Emperor's way. For every soldier that is killed in combat, there are 100 more ready to take their place. Now, when I was researching the Guard for this video, I found a lot of different conflicting numbers for them, but the most common figure that I found was that it's estimated there are around 30 trillion active Guardsmen. And that is just such an inconceivable number,
That's wild.
especially when you think about how there are only 1 million Space Marines. That's honest. Hold on a second, I gotta do some quick maths. Allegra, what's 30 trillion divided by 1 million?
30 trillion divided by 1 million is 30 million.
That means there are 30 million Guardsmen for every single Space Marine.
Damn.
That's absolutely ridiculous. And using the same quick maths, that would mean there are 3 billion Guardsmen for every single Stowed. I'll be honest with you, I wrote out 30 trillion when I was scripting this out, but I hadn't really put together just how many that was, and I'm a little bit blown away. The big boys in power armor are pretty powerful, but they're not that powerful. They're not dealing with 30 million or 3 billion Guardsmen by themselves. And it's starting to make a lot more sense why many of the sources that I've found point to the Guard as the largest cohesive fighting force in the entire galaxy. Okay,
I
getting
have
back on
trouble
track.
just
So the
imagining
Guard's
me
numbers
being
make
a
them
man
masters of
fighting
attrition
other
style
men, you know what I
warfare.
mean?
And they're mankind's first responders to
Or
pretty
the
much
God
any threat.
Emperor.
Not to mention
Oh,
they're
yeah.
spread out all over the galaxy, maintaining thousands of different regiments and thousands of worlds, all of which are normally in pretty strategic positions, ready to respond to any threat, no matter where it may appear. And it's really easy to underestimate these guys since they're essentially just human, especially when you compare them to the limitless threats found in the 40k universe. But the Guard are absolutely no joke, and are by far the most powerful fighting force in the entire Imperium. And that's not even to mention the Imperial Navy, which controls some of the largest fleets in the entire galaxy. And the Imperial Navy, to be fair, can arguably be called a different faction altogether. However, that really depends on what era you're reading about, because during the Grand Crusade, they were both considered part of the same force. And even nowadays, with them being technically separate entities, they're pretty intrinsically linked. The Guard operates as the frontline soldiers, while the Imperial Navy offers air and space support. But I think we've spent enough time on the Guard, so let's get into the top 3.
Find what you love. Love.
Have the Orcs.
Number
If you thought
3
the
spot
numbers
the
of the
Orcs.
Guard were ridiculous, the Orcs take it to a whole new level. So the orcs, or the unending green tide as some people like to call them, outnumber humanity 1,000 to 1. Now that's a rough guesstimate, but that's not just talking about the Guard, that's all humans. And across the million worlds of the Imperium, the human population is said to be in the quintillions. Yet despite that absolutely ridiculous number, the orcs still outnumber humanity. And honestly, this makes a lot of sense, as they've been around for 60 million years. When a single orc dies, it sheds a whole bunch of spores, which grow into new orcs and reach maturity in about a year. Each one of them is quantifiably tougher and more dangerous than any normal human, many of which rival even that of the Astartes. You can think of the orcs like a sentient fungus, being closer to that of mushrooms than people. They have an organ system very similar to humans, but the major thing about them is that not all these organs are essential to life.
I heard about that.
An orc can suffer grievous injuries that would kill a normal human and keep on fighting. Needless to say, this makes their force incredibly resilient and hard to put down. So not only are the orcs a seemingly unstoppable army that can quickly overrun a planet's defenses, but once a single orc shows up on your planet, the infestation will linger practically indefinitely. The orcs also have this weird type of psychic power that we and even they themselves don't fully understand. It seems like they are able to bend reality to their whims, and in a sense, their beliefs actually become real. An orc psyker, known as a weird boy, may only be able to throw fireballs around because him and the orcs in his vicinity believe that he can. Orc engineers are able to basically smash wood and metal together and create massive war engines, or even spaceships. Now, whether or not this is due to their ability to bend reality or some innate knowledge left over in their subconscious from their creators is still unclear. All of these factors combined make for one of the most powerful armies in the entire 41st millennium. However, the orcs are not without their weaknesses.
They just will
you see, the major problem with the orcs is that they're incredibly ununified. They have no greater goals than to fight. And to be fair, that is what the old ones literally bred them for during the War in Heaven. Fighting to the orcs is like eating or drinking is to humans. If they go too long without a good scrap, they'll get physically sick. And orcs grow larger based on how many fights they've been in. And theoretically, there's no limit to how large an orc can get. But despite the overwhelming amount of orcs that currently infest the galaxy, you can think of them as millions of unorganized groups just fighting millions of pointless wars in every sector of the galaxy at any given time. There's no major arcing goal for the orcs, they just want to fight.
Their faith
and seeing
is that
as how the
deep.
Orcs only care about fighting, they're basically incapable of building an advanced society. Because if the orcs run out of enemies to clobber, they'll start fighting themselves. This is what makes the Prophet of Wog, Ghazghkull Thraka, such a threat, as he seems to be able to unite the orcs under his great Wog. But as of the time of this recording, even though he's gathered the largest Wog that the universe has ever seen, he still hasn't united all of the orcs. If all of the orcs were truly to band together under a single banner and be aimed at Holy Terra itself, it could spell out the end times for humanity. But thankfully, that hasn't happened yet. In the number 2 spot, we have the Necrons.
Hell yeah, dude. Do it, bro.
The technology level of the Necrons is unlike anything we've ever seen before. They're the oldest faction in the galaxy, and the weapons they bring to bear kind of put all of the creations of humanity to shame, as their technology is millions of years past our own. Each individual Necron is an undying warrior, their bodies made of a living metal known as the necrodermis, that can literally repair itself from all but the most catastrophic of injuries. If the damage is too great, the Necron can phase out of existence and back to the safety of their tomb world, where they can either be fully repaired or their consciousness can be downloaded into a new body, making them basically immortal. The problem with the Necrons is twofold. The first is that not all of the tomb worlds have come online yet. Now the Necrons that have woken back up are split across multiple different dynasties, spread across the entirety of the Milky Way. And although the Necrons are more unified than most species, all of the dynasties have different goals and ambitions, which constantly conflict with one another. And when it comes to arrogance, the Necron may even surpass that of the Eldar. So alliances tend to be rather short-lived. The other major weakness is the ability to repopulate the species, as all of the Necrons that currently exist were the Necron tier from 60 million years ago, and the Necron tier went extinct. There is no way to make a new Necron warrior. They can surely build new ships and canoptic constructs, but once a Necron is truly and utterly destroyed, they have no ability to replace them. This is why one of the major goals for the Necrons is to reverse the process of biotransference, which is what made them into the Necrons we know today. You see, the idea is to download the Necron's consciousness into a host species, basically allowing them to pick back up where they left off 60 million years ago. These individuals would trade immortality for a normal life. However, the sentience of the host species would be completely wiped out, so needless to say, humanity's not volunteering for this. To put into perspective just how ludicrous the technology of the Necrons truly is, I want to tell you about this thing known as the Celestial Orrery, which may be the most powerful weapon in existence. You see, it's basically a giant holographic map of the entire galaxy. Every single star, sector, and system are represented in perfect detail, and it actually updates in real time. So not only does the Celestial Orrery act like an incredibly powerful scrying device that gives the Necrons access to insane levels of information, but the dark secret of the Orrery is that if an individual was so inclined, they could literally tap stars out of existence on it. If an individual was to tap one of the motes of light within the Celestial Orrery that represents a star, the corresponding star in real space would supernova, causing absolutely catastrophic damage. Now, thankfully, there's one dynasty in particular that guards the Orrery and won't let anyone else use it. They see themselves as gardeners of creation, plucking and trimming certain elements out of existence in order to preserve the timeline. Needless to say, many other Necron dynasties would love to get their hands on this thing, but they don't allow it. So it is theoretically possible that the Necrons could just tap Terra out of existence. However, the Orrery would never allow such a thing to happen, as the resulting consequences on the course of history would be absolutely uncountable. And despite how crazy the truth of the Orrery is, there's actually a fact that's far crazier. You see, during the War in Heaven, the Orrery wasn't completely unique, as there were many creations that were capable of damage on similar scales. Before the Silent King ordered all of the Necrons to go to sleep in their tomb worlds, he ordered the destruction of all of them, seeing as no good could come from weapons of such immense destructive capability. However, the Celestial Orrery was given the pass and was allowed to remain functional. So if this thing was seen as safe enough to be allowed to continue to exist, we can only imagine how powerful these other weapons could have been. And it's probably a really good thing for the galaxy that they don't exist anymore.
That's a lot of painting, dude.
Okay, so we have one faction left to go on this list, and although in my opinion they are more of a threat to humanity than the Necrons, ironically, the Necrons probably stand the best chance at beating them compared to every other race in the galaxy. I am talking, of course, about the #1 slot, the Tyranids. So it is my opinion that at this moment in time in the 41st millennium, there is no greater threat to the galaxy than that of the Tyranids. They are seemingly infinite in numbers and are able to adapt to any situation. They come in infinite variations, each more horrifying than the last, and for all intents and purposes are the ultimate life form. Now, I have mentioned the concept of unity many times throughout this video when it comes to determining the power of a certain faction. The Tyranids are possibly the most united faction that has ever existed, as they are all technically the same organism. Every single one of the quintillions of Tyranids in our galaxy are not just the same species, but they are all seemingly part of the same creature. They're all controlled by an impossibly vast intelligence known as the Hive Mind, a creature we really don't know much about, other than it exists outside of the Milky Way and is able to control all of the Tyranids simultaneously. This means that this thing is able to synchronize incredibly complex battle strategies across billions of battlefields at the same time. This is absolutely unthinkable. Not even the most advanced supercomputers in the world are capable of such a thing.
Damn.
And considering that the Hive Mind knows literally everything that any single Tyranid has ever learned, and is capable of controlling quintillions of Tyranids at the exact same time, this would put the Hive Mind on the level of a god. And what's even more horrifying than this is that it is said that all of the Tyranids we have currently seen in the Milky Way are nothing but the Scouts, and that they have already conquered every other galaxy. Now, whether or not this is true or not, we don't really know. But if it is, it would mean that the Milky Way is the last remaining bastion of sentient species. And once we're gone, there will be nothing but Tyranids. So the Tyranids as a species are supposed to represent the never-ending swarm. Wave after wave of horrifying creatures, from an endless plague of Gaunts and Gene Stealers to the massive Hierophant Biotitans, all the way up to their ships, which are technically just massive Tyranids that can measure over 10 miles in length. Now, if their numbers weren't terrifying enough, the fact that they're able to adapt quickly to new situations should be equally concerning. The Tyranids are often noted as being something like evolution on steroids. Now, when fighting the Tyranids, certain tactics cannot be used for very long, as the Tyranids learn and find new ways to counter them incredibly quickly. Whether it be through the ability to adapt new strategies to counter the enemy, or the fact that they can evolve in any way they need to. The Tyranids are never without options. If the enemy is, say, using enormous amounts of anti-tank rounds, the Tyranids can adapt to have even more armor. Is their target relying heavily on bunkers or fortified positions? Then the Tyranids will just produce more burrowing units to attack from underneath. Too many colossal titans on the battlefield? Well, then the Tyranids will just pop out some of their own. There have even been examples
but they're kind of weak, though, in order for them to be able to be horde armies, or
to combat them.
Not really.
Only for them to quickly develop to be immune.
Weak
even Grandfather Nurgle finds the Tyranids unbunbelievably frustrating to fight. And at this point, the Tyranids outnumber even the Orcs. And as long as organic matter for them to consume still exists in our galaxy,
Well, I'm
there
already,
will always be more
I'm
Tyranids.
already 10
From my perspective,
Tyranids
the Tyranids
in,
really don't have a
90 more to
weakness that I can
go.
point out. They have near perfect unity, they're able to adapt to any new situation, they outnumber every single species in the galaxy combined, and with the help of their gene stealer cults are able to infiltrate any world they want. But if I had to come up with a weakness, the major one that I would point out is they don't have the ability to travel faster than the speed of light, and they don't utilize the warp to travel. At the end of the day, their ships are just migratory animals, so this takes them an incredibly long time to reach their destination. They're giving their enemies an incredibly long time to prepare for them. However, most of the time they don't even get that opportunity, as they have this thing known as the Shadow in the Warp, which is a massive psychic disturbance that the Tyranids produce that can shut down psychic powers on the battlefield. But it also renders their fleets almost completely invisible to detection systems. Additionally, the Tyranids do have a reliance on what is known as a synaptic link. You see, the hive mind influence spreads across impossible distances, but it does this through certain Tyranid species that act as a conduit for its commands. Tyranids that get too far out of range of such a link end up reverting into little more than feral beasts. They're still incredibly dangerous, but they're not the unified fighting force that they once were. Every single day that goes by, more and more Tyranids are produced, and the noose they have created that is tightening around the throat of the Milky Way galaxy is getting tighter and tighter. With every other major faction in this list, there's a lot of ifs, buts, and maybes. If the orcs ever manage to make a list of goals and objectives, they're going to be incredibly powerful. If Abaddon is able to fully reunite the Chaos Warbands once again, for longer than just a single Black Crusade, it's going to be a major problem. If the Necron's tomb worlds start to come online all at once, it's going to be a major problem. If the Tau are allowed to continue advancing for another few thousand years, then they may dominate the galaxy. And as I'm sure you can see, there seems to be a pattern here. There's a lot of determining factors when it comes to where they're going to end up in the future. But as of right now, the Tyranids are the apocalyptic level threat. There's no ifs, buts, or maybes with the Tyranids. They are definitely the apex predator when it comes to all of the sentient species of the Milky Way. And if things continue as they're going now, we will all end up being nothing more than bug food. Now, I know this video has run a lot longer than all of my other ones, but if you've made it this far, I feel like a quick explanation for this list needs to be done, just to give you a clearer picture of what the universe actually looks like. Now, it's easy to say that something like the Tau Empire is stronger than the Sisters of Battle. I think this goes without saying. But what you have to remember is that the Sisters, or even the Astra Militarum, only represent one portion of the Imperium as a whole. This goes as well for the forces of the Eldar Empire or the forces of Chaos. When you take these alliances into account, the list starts to look more like this. I would still rate the Tyranids as my #1 pick for the most dangerous faction in the entire galaxy. That's not going to change, the bugs are scary. But the Imperium of Man as a unified whole scores a lot higher, whereas something like the Tau Empire ends up back near the bottom of the list.
Alright, let's do top 10 strongest characters. Have you seen a game of 40K? I have. I haven't seen like a whole one all the way through, but I've been watching, what is it? Vanguard Tactics is the channel that I've been catching some on. It's pretty dope. I just yeah, I haven't fully gotten the grasp of it, but we're getting there. We're gonna level up one of these days. I've gotten a little bit of experience. But we're not even level 1, you know what I mean? I've been reading the Warhammer 40K handbook that came with the box set that I got. So, something about rolling twice because either my guys get to shoot twice, or yeah, I'm pretty sure the guys get to shoot twice. I don't know. I'm still getting the hang of it. Let me see. Game of 40K. You can search YouTube for battle reports. Yeah, they're cool. Yeah, I'm down. Battle reports. I'm way down. It depends on the unit. Okay. Yeah, right now the pyro guy. I don't know. I'm still learning. We'll have to wrap your head around. It is. It's endless lore, man. Endless ocean deep lore. Mariana Trench deep. Should we do top 10 most powerful characters in Warhammer 40K? Or should we do the top 10 most disturbing 40K characters? Or Necron's deep dive? Which one of these 3 videos should I toss on here? One of those 3. Necrons? Alright, I'm down. Since I like them, I'm way down. Let's do it. Whoops.
Of all the sentient species within the 40K universe, none of them are quite as mysterious or as complex as the Necrons. Now, these are beings out of time, a species that should have been confined to the grave millions of years ago. They are a relic of a horrific time in the universe's history, where the entire galaxy was engulfed in the flames of war. Nowadays, the Necrons exist as a cautionary tale of what the quest for vengeance and immortality can bring. They are an absolutely ancient species, the oldest in the galaxy, in fact. And in the time of flesh and blood, nearly 60 million years ago, they waged an impossible war against godlike species known as the Old Ones. Now, their hatred of them was so severe that they were willing to sacrifice their very souls to see their enemies eradicated. They made deals with terrifying eldritch gods and traded everything for immortality. The once proud yet frail Necron tier shed their living forms in exchange for the undying metal bodies we know today. And although originally betrayed and deceived by those very same gods, the Necrons would suffer no one above them and turned against their unholy masters, shattering and shackling them to their engines of war, turning their horrifying destructive abilities against those that would deny them as the masters of the physical universe. Now, these monsters at one point had been successful in conquering nearly the entire galaxy. They saw all life as beneath them and preyed on the living, feeding them to their gods like livestock. And then suddenly, they vanished. The unstoppable silver tide of death and horror that had enslaved gods and committed a million-year xenocide of unimaginable proportions disappeared without a trace, never to be seen again. Now, for millions of years, these stories were thought to be no more than a legend, a metaphor for the price of vengeance, or possibly even just a scary bedtime story that the Eldar would tell their children. But here in the 41st millennium, it has become apparent that these impossible tales were true, that the Necrons had returned, and they had come back to reclaim what was once theirs, and eradicate all that stood in their way.
When the Necron tier shed flesh and left death for lesser creatures, we thought of only freedom from fear and making kingdoms that would never die. We did not think of what else immortality would entail. We thought in terms of wars and destruction and conquest. But eternity also requires what you would call entertainment.
Bro.
To engage the Necrons in battle is to fight death itself. Their undying legions harness some of the most advanced technology the galaxy has ever seen. They are arrogant and soulless and see all organic life as beneath them. Now, to stare into the glowing green eye sockets of the Necron is to see eons of hatred made manifest, to witness the rise and fall of countless empires, and to truly know the bitter price of hatred. You would see the futility of struggle.
The curse of living forever, huh?
That can't die. How do you wage war against something that is so more advanced than you? Then the most powerful weapons you can bring to bear are no better than sticks and stones. And how do you prepare for a war that can come from any direction at any moment,
9th edition.
even from beneath your own feet? And what do you
so just
do
last edition, we're in the 10th now?
Everything you've ever thought to be true was a lie. That your pathetic view of the superiority of your species and your claim to the universe was built upon nothing more than ignorance and wishful thinking. What do you do when the world your people have called home for millions of years, the one that birthed your species and whose value cannot be quantified?
All right, I gotta look into what people were like, the big bads of every edition. It's like, wow, dude, everybody has had its own like.
And what do you do?
I thought it was, you know, since I'm new, I felt like the pyramids were the big bad.
You've probably heard that their planets are normally referred to as tomb worlds, but what exactly is a tomb world? So you can honestly think of a tomb world as basically a planet-sized crypt, an eternal resting place of the Necrons. Each contains deep labyrinthian underground structures that can house millions of them, each one locked away in stasis for millions of years. Although the Necrons are sealed away deep in stasis, the halls of these structures are actively patrolled by their canoptic constructs. They maintain and repair the crypts and keep everything in working order, eagerly awaiting the return of their dormant masters. So even though these structures are slumbering, they're maintained by incredibly complex AI systems that monitor the Necrons and keep the complex safe from intruders. These worlds these structures are confined to were once ruled by the Necrons during the War in Heaven. However, since these structures have lain dormant for around 60 million years, many of them have been colonized by new species. You would have no way of knowing that you're on a tomb world until it comes online, and the Necrons try to remove it. The process of which a tomb world can become active.
Oh man, there's just so much lore. It can be the result of a simple timer going off, geological activity that damages the structure, or even its AI detecting intrusive life forms within the confines of its walls. Now, it's not uncommon for eccentric and hopeful individuals to end up digging too deep within the surface of their world, seeking to mine natural resources only to discover the ancient crypt of the Necrons. Now, obviously, hindsight is 20/20 here, but the correct thing to do would be fill that hole back up and pretend you never saw anything.
However, the greed of sentient species knows no bounds, and the promise of ancient alien archaeotech is too tempting to be resisted. Now, this simple act of curiosity is often the catalyst that spells the doom of many a world. Now, however a tomb world ends up becoming active, when an awakening is triggered, it's basically the apocalypse. The complex begins to rise from beneath the surface. Massive earthquakes across the planet devastate the population. Oceans drain away and lava boils to the surface. Now, amidst the calamity of natural disasters, the immortal killing machines begin to claw their way to the surface, rising up within the very foundation of their intruders' defensible structures.
Is it like
Quite
a movie
often, this
movie, or
actually
is it
resembles
like a
something out of an old
fan
zombie
film
movie.
thing?
Undead robots literally rising from their graves to eradicate the living, swarms of alien constructs blotting out the sun, and long-dead lords rising from their graves to take command of their legions once again. In deafening silence, they ordered the destruction of the living and a cleansing of the unclean from their sacred world. The weapons these creatures wield are unlike anything humanity has ever encountered. It is seemingly as advanced as it is ancient, mass-produced gauze weaponry that flays skin from the bone and can reduce the target to nothing more than atoms in mere moments. Even the lowliest of warriors is equipped with advanced targeting arrays that make them devastatingly accurate. Necron pilots are hardwired into their vehicles, their machines basically becoming an extension of themselves. And without organic bodies that are subject to the laws of physics, they're able to make absolutely impossible maneuvers that would kill a normal flesh and blood pilot. The majority of their soldiers are immortal, unthinking, literal killing machines that seek to purge all life from a world. The attacks come with no warning, as the world's defenses are quickly overwhelmed. All organic life is atomized, and the Necrons take no prisoners.
Oh, it's just one shot.
If a species is fast enough to get a distress beacon out, the world their allies come to defend will look radically different. The architecture of the previous owners has been left in ruins, and all that remains of organic life is but dust in the wind. Instead, they find colossal monolithic structures of ancient alien design, architecture that hasn't seen the light of a sun in 60 million years. They are met with unbelievable resistance from a newly embedded ruler. Now, what makes the Necrons particularly dangerous is the fact that they're all basically immortal. Each one is comprised of a living metal substance known as the necrodermis. Their bodies can repair themselves from all but the most catastrophic of damage. Now, if the damage is too great to be repaired in the fight itself, they can also utilize a phasing technology. This teleports the wounded or crippled individual and all of their equipment out of the battle and back to the safety of their tomb world. Their ability to heal themselves is known as the resurrection protocols, and this allows them to take enormous amounts of punishment and heal from practically any injury. This makes them incredibly difficult to destroy or even capture. We have no way of studying them or their technology. We only have first-hand accounts of the worlds they have purged, data logs and Vox transcripts from the moments of annihilation, a warning in the darkness of what is to come. And here's the thing about the Necrons. They're a particularly arrogant species. They see no difference between the forces of humanity, the slaves to chaos, or the various alien races that inhabit the galaxy. All are vermin and must be purged. The galaxy once belonged to the Necrons, and they've come back to reclaim it. Their conquest of eradication will never end so long as the living still draw breath within their kingdom. Now, depending on when you started reading about the Necrons, their lore has actually undergone a couple of different iterations over the years. Now, the old lore basically portrayed the Necrons as an unstoppable tide of robot zombies, Terminators that would appear without warning and purge all life from the planet. There was no reasoning with them, no communication, and they were beyond mysterious. We knew practically nothing about them. And that was honestly kind of part of their charm. They were meant to be this super mysterious and horrifying entity, an archetype of terror. They existed to demonstrate just how brutal and unforgiving the galaxy truly was. That for all of our understanding and all of our knowledge, there were things in this universe we couldn't even begin to comprehend. That our persistence was ultimately futile, and the superiority of mankind nothing but a myth. However, more recent lore, for lack of better words, has actually kind of fleshed them out quite a bit, giving the Necrons a voice, and ourselves a deeper insight into what they used to be and what they have become. Now, it was once believed that all Necrons lacked any form of consciousness. However, we know now that basically the more important a Necron was in life, the more sentience they maintain in their current form. This means that Necron nobles are incredibly intelligent and fully capable of communication, and have their personalities intact. Their minds are unburdened from the limitations of flesh. They are able to process information much quicker than a normal human, and have various neural programs that enhance their minds even further. Now, one such cognitive upgrade is known as subminds. A Necron lord who has been upgraded with such a thing basically has multiple brains. These are often reflections of their own mind, but hyper-specialized in certain areas. Now, in the novel The Twice Dead King, the main character
have not.
Oltex is equipped with multiple submines,
I don't know.
each a
I don't know
copy
the
of his
difference
own, yet
between
completely
any of
dedicated to
that
one
stuff.
specific aspect of his personality and knowledge.
just so
In this way,
confused
he is
with
able
it.
to have full
Yeah,
and
yeah.
complete dialogues with himself. in
I'm
order
not
to
even
come up with the
aware
best
of
possible
it.
path of action
And if
for
I
any
am
given
aware of
situation.
it, then I'm so
Of his
confused.
multiple subminds, one is dedicated to
not aware.
war and
You know what I mean?
combat, another to politics, and another is completely dedicated to xenology. So, in a sense, no matter where he goes, he has a team of
Minis in
trained
1 hour.
scholars inside his
Damn, I
head to
hope
help
so,
him
man. I
make
just gotta keep
decisions.
remembering
And
the.
speaking of which, let's
Just
speak
go
a bit
for it.
more
Just
on
go
Necron
for it. You're not
dynasties
doing
and their
detail.
nobility.
You're not doing
Now,
detail.
there are many
Just go.
great
Just go.
Necron
Just go.
dynasties, each led by a different ruling class. They all have different wants, desires, and plans, and it's actually really interesting to see them bicker and squabble amongst themselves. Now, despite their background, all Necrons are a proud
If I can
people,
get this
heavily
close
inspired
to
by
it
the
and
ancient
still
Egyptian
see
culture of Earth.
the letters
Now, despite their
pretty good.
superhuman levels of intellect,
I'm
not
gonna get a
all the
little closer to
Necrons
the
made it
mini.
through the deep sleep with their minds completely intact. It is said that a great madness has infected the Necron people, and many of them have had their minds kind of deteriorated over the years. Now, what that means is unique to the individual, but it's not uncommon for a once benevolent lord to become paranoid and hyper-aggressive when he reawakens. Now, when it comes to communication, Necrons are fully capable of speech, but there's no real reason to do this other than out of tradition. Now, most of the time, they are basically communicating
just
free
go
form
for it
of
when
binary,
doing
which
the-
in addition uses
Yeah,
a series
buddy.
of glyphs represented on their
You're gonna
bodies.
paint over it
Now, these
with
glyphs
this
give
anyways.
further
Yeah,
emphasis to
exactly,
emotion,
exactly.
and you can basically think of them like a high form of
that
emoji.
angle.
These can
I'm
represent
using
happiness,
the
sadness,
arms
anger,
thing I got for my
futility,
birthday.
anything you can
Here,
think
check it
of.
out.
Now, likewise, their ships are often completely uninhabitable by organic life, as the Necrons have no need for air.
So the
They're
arm thing right
literally
here
floating tombs
has the
inhabited only
light,
by the dead.
has
Of
the
all
camera
things
for
the
my
Necrons
face,
are known for, their
and then over
technology
here
and
has another
superior
little
weaponry are
arm
probably their number one
for
claim
the
to fame.
GoPro
So
for the
let's talk
mini.
a bit more
The
about
mini
their
goes right
weapons.
here. So I'm
Cascade
painting on
Platinum
the
Plus gives
table.
you the highest standard of
the
clean,
GoPro
even in
for
your
the
machine.
mini, and
Dare
this
to
one's on
dish
my
differently.
face, and then the light coming down. So it looks like that.
Feeling healthy
And then
by leaps and bounds.
my
Making
face
a dinner
one.
that
But they're
makes
all
their
set
whole
up.
day, and giving your best friend the best nutrients
Here.
for their best life.
Sorry, stupid commercials. Bye, my streaming buddy. See you next time. All right, Bella Truth, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon. Thank you for hanging out. We're just going to paint maybe another hour or so. Hopefully we'll be done by then. We'll see. We'll see you. We'll catch you tomorrow for SG1 Wednesday. Target SG1. Nice. That's one beefy arm. It is, dude. Super beefy. Yeah, no, it's cool. Yeah, no, it's great, dude. Great great birthday presents all around. Everything's been great. We got our desk too. Yeah, dude. It's amazing. Everything's amazing. Alright, hold on, let me switch it back over. Alright, we good? Everything good? All the cameras on? Alright. I'm still getting used to the setup over here. Turn the sound back on. And turn back Buddy. Turn Buddy back on.
Commonplace than that of Gauss technology. Now, Gauss weapons come in many different forms, but all of them work by projecting a beam of energy that disrupts and disassembles matter at the molecular level. In a practical sense, this technology can be used by constructs such as scarabs to disassemble matter into its core components, and then use those to reconstruct into something new. Breaking down rocks to then use those molecules to create something more useful, like a bridge or a fortress, for example. Now, when utilized as a weapon, the Gauss beam creates a devastating effect on living flesh. It basically breaks down the impact site and turns the target into dust. The effects of the beam go layer by layer on the target, tearing them apart piece by piece. Now, needless to say, this is a pretty horrific way to go, and the Gauss weaponry is rightfully feared. These weapons can take the form of mass-produced Gauss rifles to the massive Gauss flux arrays, the larger of which can tear apart hordes of infantry in mere moments. Now, another common form of Necron weaponry is known as Tesla weapons. Now, these firearms fire arcing bolts of lightning that can bounce from target to target, increasing in strength every time they jump. Now, if they're allowed to jump too quickly, these arcs can become powerful enough to crack concrete. Now, although an interesting fact about them, these weapons are normally used more for engaging with a lot of lightly armored foes, whereas the Gauss weaponry is much better against highly armored targets. Now, particle weapons are completely different from the first two. Whereas
water.
gauze weaponry disrupts matter and causes it to break apart, a particle weapon basically energizes atoms and causes them to violently be repelled from one another, the target literally tearing itself apart. Now this can render human soldiers into piles of goo or cause tanks to collapse in on themselves, as the atoms that held them together are ripped in every direction. And finally, let's talk about the big guns. Now, these are known as doomsday weapons. They are massive hulking death machines that have to be mounted on a stable weapons platform, as they are far too large to be wielded by infantry. Now, they use a massive stream of plasma that is focused and projected through a targeting crystal, which unleashes a hellish beam of devastating light that eradicates everything in its path. Now, the prey these are used against are far larger and more dangerous than any infantry. Now, some of them are capable of obliterating even the largest of war machines, tearing out the heart of an Imperial Titan in a single shot. And in order to not bog this video down by listing literally every type of Necron weapon ever documented, I'll make a point to mention the most devastating creation in the entire galaxy. Now, it is known as the Celestial Orrery, and it's basically a giant holographic map of the Milky Way. Now, every star, every solar system, every sector is illuminated within it in precise detail.
Thanks, man.
Now, traditionally, this thing is used more like a
so
scrying
everybody that
device,
has
as having a map of everything that updates practically in real time is an unbelievably valuable tool. However, the Celestial Orrery harbors a much darker function in that the user can literally select stars within the map and basically tap them out of existence. Now, if the user was so inclined, he could cause any star in the galaxy to supernova, unleashing destruction on a cosmic scale never before seen. Now, how such a creation works is a complete mystery, and because this thing is a creation of sheer horrific magnificence, the entire Orskar dynasty is sworn to its protection. And although many other dynasties or even forces outside of the Necrons would love to get their hands on this thing, the Orskar dynasty will eternally defend it with their lives. Seeking counsel with the Celestial Orrery is not something that's out of the question, it's just very difficult to do. Now, in the novel The Infinite and the Divine, Trazyn was able to use this thing to locate a particular device of interest to him. However, let's just say that the meeting did not go well and he's definitely banned from ever using it again. Now, the reason I bring this thing up is to elaborate on something of critical importance, for you to understand just how powerful the Necrons once were. You see, the War in Heaven was an event 60 million years ago that saw the entire galaxy engulfed in war. Every conflict we see in the 41st millennium supposedly pales in comparison to just how horrific this time period was. The Necrons had created weapons capable of killing gods, and after the war had ended, the Silent King ordered the destruction of all of them, seeing no reason for such terrifying weaponry to exist, as the cost to the universe would be too great if they ever fell into the
eventually
wrong
they're going to be all gone,
the
maybe
Celestial
like by the
Orrery
15th edition
was
maybe
allowed
or
to
something.
remain functional. So if this thing got the pass, we can only begin to imagine just how insane the other weapons must have been. Now, despite what we normally see in artwork and on the tabletop game, the reality is that most battles take place in the void of space. So let's take a moment to talk some more about their ships.
That's pretty cool, I guess.
So
I
much
guess
like
just,
everything about the
fixing out
Necrons,
whatever
the ships they
bugs
use
or
are
kinks
incredibly advanced.
they've
So
had
much
for a
so
long
that their
time, maybe.
technology seems to be more akin to arcane magic than actual science. Now, what we know about them is shockingly very little, but we do know that they utilize two main types of systems to achieve faster than light travel. The first is what is known as an inertialess drive, meaning that somehow they have managed to break the laws of physics and their ships create no inertia, meaning that in the vacuum of space, they are able to move incredibly quickly, possibly on par if not faster than those who utilize the warp to travel. Now, it goes without saying that utilizing something like this is obviously incredibly efficient and practical, as warp travel is insanely dangerous. Now, the second thing they use is a system of portals known as Dolem Gates. You see, these things allow the Necrons to infiltrate the webway, which is basically like a network of tunnels that spreads across the known galaxy. They exist as basically a pocket dimension between the warp and real space, and are traditionally used only by the Eldar, as anyone who is able to infiltrate them would quickly get lost within their vast labyrinthian network of tunnels. Now, the Dolem Gates haven't been mentioned in a long time, so it's unclear if the Necrons still utilize them. Now, even though in the 41st millennium, the webway is currently mastered by the Eldari, it didn't always used to be that way. You see, it was originally created by the Old Ones, the ancient enemy of the Necrons, and who they fought during the War in Heaven. And before the Necrons found a way to infiltrate it, they were constantly outmaneuvered by the Old Ones. It was the creation of the Dolem Gates that quickly swung the war in the Necrons' favor. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and we'll talk about the War in Heaven in a little bit. Now, what's really interesting about their ships is that they have something of an Achilles heel.
Discord, so
you see, their technology is unbelievably ridiculous. and it can actually prove to be ineffective against the barbaric and primitive technology utilized by the Imperium of Man. In The Twice Dead King, there is a group of Necrons that are fleeing from the Imperium. The torpedoes that mankind utilizes are seen as unbelievably primitive. The Necrons scoffing that the brutish and uncivilized race of man still fires physical projectiles at their enemies. This is seen as incredibly uncouth and boorish. That being said, the shielding their ships use were created to deflect blows from god weapons, energy-based weaponry that could shatter stars. They were not designed to protect against the spacefaring equivalent of throwing rocks at your enemy. Now, without getting into spoilers, this makes the human pursuers in the story incredibly dangerous to the Necrons. So let's talk a little bit more about how Necron society is structured. Now, when it comes to the Necron hierarchy, each of the Tomb Worlds is ruled by a singular individual that controls a vast court of nobles. Now, smaller Tomb Worlds may be ruled by a lord
tell me that
or
the
an
taller
overlord,
one is the
whereas
newer
larger
one.
ones may be governed by what is known as a pharaoh.
They both
There
look
are hundreds of Necron
but
dynasties,
I'd rather have
some
the taller
splinters
one.
of much larger ones, but all with varying
can't believe
cultures
you're
and
doing
power
that.
levels, and the largest of which is known as the Sautek
So
dynasty.
badass.
Now, the Sautek dynasty is possibly the most well-known of all
This is
Necron
yours,
dynasties.
dude?
They've
You-
claimed
you
hundreds
painted
of
these?
worlds since their time of
Bro.
awakening, with more and more of their aligned
Hell
Tomb Worlds
yeah.
coming online every day. Now, the Sautek dynasty is so large and powerful that it dwarfs all others by comparison. Ruled over by Imhotep the Stormlord, the Sautek dynasty
Oh, no,
is
they're not yours.
rigorously
Oh, okay.
militaristic in nature,
Yeah,
limiting
dude,
its
this looks
conquest to
badass.
not just that
Whoever's
of
they
lesser
are, these
races,
look badass.
but also those of rival dynasties. They seek to assimilate all Necrons under one banner. The Sautek dynasty wishes to reunite
crazy.
the Necron people once again, and if this must
more
be
time.
done through military conquest, then so be it. Now, many lords will bend the knee to Imhotep's might
Good
before
old
any blows are
Google.
struck, often being highly praised
That's
and
dope.
rewarded for doing so. Being folded into the ranks of
Do
the
you,
Sautek is
do you
deemed
like
an
the original
honorable
more
path to
than
take, as the wise ruler's
what they were
pride
turning into?
was less important than the good of his people. This is possibly the best outcome
Is it
such
nostalgia
an
for
individual
you?
could hope for,
Why
as
you
to
like
deny the
the other ones,
Stormlord's
the
will
originals?
is to invite an unwinnable war. Now, such a dynasty would be absolutely brutalized and inevitably absorbed into the Sautek legions anyways. Now, despite the vast cultural differences of many of the dynasties, there's actually a lot of trends that remain the same within their various royal courts. You see, each court is made up of a lot of different members, each with different backgrounds. There are cryptechs who are basically like court wizards. There's scientists and engineers of the Necrons that study many of the arts that were practiced by their ancestors. These disciplines include that of biomancy, plasmancy, and even chronomancy, the study of manipulating time. Now, despite their seemingly arcane nature, all of these studies of the cryptechs are scientific in origin. To the casual observer, there is little difference between a trained cryptech and a psyker. Both are able to bend the nature of reality to their whim and unleash devastation upon their enemies. Now, like all Necrons, the cryptechs are beings of the physical universe, and thus have no ability to manipulate the world. To do so requires a connection to the Immaterium. And the Necrons do not have souls, and thus, for lack of better words, are basically just engram copies of consciousness. They cannot manipulate the Immaterium. It doesn't change the fact that what they are capable of is truly remarkable. A skilled cryptech can bend space and time, not to mention keep the ancient machinery of the Necrons in working order. Other members of the court include that of royal
I guess you got to
wardens.
kit bash in order to get them to look
act
good.
like a hybrid between a lieutenant on the battlefield
cutting
and a
and
trained
super
diplomat.
gluing
When it comes to war, they make excellent
using
lieutenants,
green
commanding
stuff.
legions of troops in the name of their king.
I finally saw a video of what that green
simultaneously being
stuff
trained
is.
in the art of dialogue and politics.
Well,
They're able to speak
alright.
for their lord when he is
I'm not
present.
there yet,
And the rewards
but
for
when I
those
get
that
there,
demonstrate competence in
I'll
enacting
be there
the will
one
of their
day.
king are vast and great. Whether they be gifted their own tomb world or their own swath of space to rule over is something that many lords strive for. The generosity of their king knows no bounds, but so does his wrath for those that would fail him. You see, underneath the Lovecraftian horror of the Necrons is something much more earthly in nature. They are rigid people that adhere to tradition in the strictest of terms. These are holdovers from the time of flesh, where loyalty to one's king was of incredible importance. Concepts of subterfuge and going against his orders are unbelievably taboo. It's as if the ruler of a dynasty is seen as a living god. So to go against his will is out of the question. Now, this leads many nobles to having a sycophantic relationship with their lords, doing all they can to seek their favor. At the same time, a Necron king must embody the role of a living god without question. To show mercy is to display weakness to his subjects.
Really?
Mercy and forgiveness are a sickness that will corrode even the strongest of dynasties. A Necron
Well,
ruler
instead of
must be
getting
like
the
a wall
expensive
that breaks
stuff, I
the
can
tides,
just get plumber's
never
putty,
faltering in his goals or
and
ambitions.
I should be all
And
right.
although members of his court seldom
down.
falter in their loyalty, this does not mean treachery cannot come from outside of a court. In this sense, many nobles are distrusting of outsiders from other dynasties. Now you see, the diversity of the Necrons doesn't begin and end within the confines of a dynasty, as there are various sub-factions and cults that are spread across all of Necron culture. Now, one of which is known as the Destroyer cult. You see, these individuals truly encompass the madness that can infect Necrons over time. Members of the Destroyer cult have an absolute disdain for all organic life. Now, Necrons in general tend to view humans and other sentient species as unclean. Lacking the purity of the metal form makes them inherently weak and uncivilized. However, there is a vastly larger portion of Necrons that want to undo what they see as the metal curse,
I gotta do
hoping
better
to find
about
a way to reverse
stabilizing
biotransference,
my
the
hand.
process that turned them into the Necrons we know today, but we'll cover that shortly. It is the belief of these individuals that if they find a suitable host species and clear away all other threats, then one day they might find a way to transfer their consciousness into said species. And in this way, the Necrons could pick up where they left off 60 million years ago. They would trade away immortality for a normal life. The Destroyer cult sees this concept as abhorrent. They wish to distance themselves from organics as much as possible, often contorting and upgrading their own bodies for the sole purpose of being better at killing. The Destroyers are death incarnate and will
I'm
often
not
purge
actually,
entire
not yet,
worlds
not yet.
of
This is
every
actually
living
a
creature, all the way
different
down to
brush
microscopic
of that
organisms,
same
using their
cheap
God-killing
pack that I
weaponry
had
to
for
boil away oceans
like
and scour the
$1.75
land.
for 7
Destroyers can be
brushes.
found
It's
throughout
just a
Necron
different one of the
society,
7
but they
brushes.
are often
The
viewed as
Citadel
barbaric and
paintbrush I
inherently
have right
untrustworthy.
here.
Now that being said, the Destroyers are so good at doing what they
Read
do
it? Yeah,
that only the most
Citadel.
foolish and arrogant of lords
But I haven't
would
opened
deny
it,
their
I haven't
usefulness.
painted with it
Destroyers are
yet.
often taken as auxiliary forces
I'm just,
or
yeah,
used as
I don't know.
decimating
I'm
shock
not there yet, I
troops.
guess.
And despite how they
I
are
don't feel
normally portrayed, they
comfortable
do have their
in
own
my
culture
painting
and values.
skills
What compels an individual
to
to become a destroyer is,
probably ruin
however,
that brush
currently
just
unknown.
yet.
Now, some believe that it is
Almost,
a curse
almost,
left
almost.
over from the shattering of one of the Catan, a curse
Yeah.
that, in reality, may just be some kind of program buried deep in their neural
We
networks.
have other nice
Now,
brushes
another
too,
slightly
but
more
I
disturbing
just
faction
don't
of
wanna ruin
Necrons
them.
is known as the Flayed
I know I'm
Ones.
gonna. I
You
know
see,
I'm
Flayed
gonna.
Ones are viewed
It's
as
just
diseased and twisted
make them last
individuals.
at least
They are
past
afflicted with a
Christmas,
madness
you know?
curse
You know?
known as the Flayer virus that causes them to slowly go insane over time.
Yes,
Now,
I
once
will
afflicted
probably
with the
use it
Flayer
for
virus,
details.
a
I was
Necron
using
will
this
begin
other
to crave
one
the taste of flesh.
from a
Now, this
different
starts
pack.
small at first. The individual may take a finger or some other grisly trophy from
These
the battlefield
triangle
and consume it in
handle
secret.
brushes
Over time, the desire
pretty
for
cool.
meat grows stronger and stronger.
And this one has
until
a
the
small
individual
one
completely
too.
loses
It's
himself to
probably
their
around
hunger.
the same
Now, this can
size
take
as the
years to develop. Some notable individuals
Citadel
holding
brush,
off
maybe
their
a little bit
transformation for
bigger.
multiple decades. Others with less strong
Citadel's
wills can
got a
lose
nice
themselves quite
pip.
quickly. And here's the really
this
sad
blue
thing
one's
about
got,
this.
like,
The Necrons are robots. They
kinda
don't have
fluffy.
mouths or any type of digestive
But
system.
yeah, that's
for
what I've
that
been
matter.
using for detail
So an
lately.
individual afflicted with the curse can often be seen ripping and tearing into piles of bodies, trying to shove as much of the meat into their mouths as they can. But they don't have mouths. They just have a marking on their faceplate to show where a mouth once was.
I should.
Viscera
Especially
and gore
for, like,
smearing all over their bodies and dribbling down through their
since
mechanical
I don't have
insides.
that many
They're like
colors.
hungry ghosts.
Like if I were to do
every
the
day spent
eyes
in
or
agony,
something.
their hunger growing deeper
Well,
and
I guess it
deeper,
doesn't matter.
yet
I
they
can do the
cannot
eyes
feed.
black, right?
Now, over time, their bodies will
tongue,
begin to twist
if I
and
had red, I
mutate
would
to
do
better
the tongue.
serve them as harvesters of gore. Their fingers and arms fusing together in
But like
long,
the
thin, scythe-like
where I
blades.
come out of those
Their
lines,
spines twisting
that's
and
what
contorting,
I need to do.
and their limbs
definite
elongating,
detail. I should
forcing
use
them to
the
permanently
other
be
little
hunched
brush.
over, taking
The
on the
Citadel
appearance of a
brush for that.
crouching predator. The Flayed Ones are seen as the lowest form of life within Necron society, and the idea that any one of them could turn into such a creature is absolutely horrifying. Worst of all,
oh yeah,
they
I
believe
always
that
do.
this
Every time I
curse is
put it in there, I
contagious.
give it that little spin.
When an individual is found to be displaying
Spin it while
symptoms
you
of the
drag it.
virus, they are often banished, either being
Try to,
exiled
like,
from their dynasty and sent off
swirl
into
it
the void of
into a
space,
point.
or more commonly, forced to reside deep in the undercroft
Yeah,
of their tomb
yeah,
worlds,
yeah.
long forgotten dark places where they will be forever alone,
You got to, if
save
not,
for the
it gets
company
all
of other cursed.
stupid looking.
Now, over time, the
Yeah,
Flayed Ones will
already got a
develop
hair
the
sticking
ability
out of
to
it.
tunnel through reality. The scent of blood from distant battlefields
we're
across the
good with the
stars,
false alarm.
drawing them together.
Probably like
Now,
dusk
Necron
or
armies
something.
do not traditionally utilize the Flayed Ones in war. More often, they materialize seemingly at random at the sites of great battles that the Necrons are involved in. They rip through a portal into reality and descend on the battlefield like a wave of mechanical zombies, come to feast upon the flesh of the living. Now, it was thought for a long time that the Flayed Ones had no personality, that they had completely descended into madness and any semblance of who they once were had been completely lost to history. Now, part of their transformation is the losing of the ability to speak, so there was no way to actually communicate with them. However, recently we've been given a much deeper insight into them, and the reality is actually far more depressing than we originally thought.
I almost forgot to paint his
In
head.
the second novel of the Twice Dead King trilogy, it is revealed that the Flayed Ones still maintain their personalities. They are not as insane as we once thought. Now, they communicate through a series of taps, tapping their claws out in a binary system to communicate messages.
Bro.
Those who have been afflicted with the curse, no matter what stage they're in, can actually understand this, as if they were
can
speaking the
communicate
Necron's
like
native
that?
language. Now,
Morse
here's the
code
saddest
tapping.
part. You see, these long-forgotten individuals that have
Daily
been banished from their
brushes.
dynasties and forced to live in
Bristle
the shadows
side down
actually
in the
remain
cup.
some of the most loyal
the
subjects within Necron society.
It will
The
ruin your
protagonist of the
brushes.
story,
Don't
the Necron Lord
also dry
Ultex,
them
ends up
brushes.
having a conversation with one of his friends who has completed his
Yeah, you gotta
transformation
try
into a
to
Flayed One.
not let
And
the
without getting
paint
into
go
spoilers, the
into
Necron
the
protagonist asks why
what's
the
the metal
Flayed Ones
piece thing
continuously
called? Yeah,
showed up to
don't
help them.
let the
And
paint
the
go
Flayed
inside
One
of it,
is
so try to
deeply
keep them
saddened by
down.
this question and
And
asks
don't
him,
let them
why
sit
do you
inside
think?
the cup because
He
it'll
implies
also
that despite
mess up
being
your
banished
brushes
and despite
just
his
sitting in
people
there.
looking
Oh,
upon
dude,
him
yeah.
as a
I
monster,
saw
he
a
still
couple
has
videos
a deep
on
love for his dynasty.
like
And no matter what,
taking care of
he's
your
still
brushes
loyal to his king
and
and will show up whenever he
conditioner,
needs it.
soap, back
Now,
of the
whether this is
hand,
true
back of the
or
hand
not of all
cleaning,
Flayed
circular
Ones or just this particular
motion.
group is still left
Hang them when
unclear,
you're done.
but it certainly gives us a new
So
insight
much
into the
stuff,
workings
dude.
of a particularly
So much stuff.
mysterious
That's
group.
why I'm trying to be so careful because I know I'm gonna forget something. So I'd rather forget something with the cheap brushes. That way, at least I'll because I'm gonna learn the hard way. That's the only way I learn. But before getting there, I'm doing it.
So how did the Necrons get here? Who were they before they became the undead metal skeletons that we know today? Now, way back in the before times, the Necrons did
In
not
the before
exist,
times, I love
but the
that.
species that would inevitably become them was known as the Necrontyr. Now, this was a cursed and frail species that had the unfortunate fate of being born on an uncaring world next to a super radioactive star. Now, their planet was barren and hostile to life, and the sad truth of the matter was radiation sickness and cancers ran rampant through their society. They lived incredibly short lives, and their lifespan was filled with pain and suffering. Now, despite the overwhelming odds, the Necrontyr endured. They weathered the storm that was their destiny, and through some miracle, managed to reach the spacefaring age. Now, the Necrontyr knew that if they stayed on their world, their species would inevitably wither and die. As through the generations, their species' deterioration was getting worse and worse. So they built vast ships and set off in every direction,
Yeah, dude.
desperately trying to
I
find
watched
a
a
new place to
few
live, so
videos
that their
on how to
children
take
would
care
at
of
least
my
have a
brushes.
chance in this cold,
I should
hard
probably watch
galaxy
more
that
so
didn't
I
care
get it
about
more
them.
ingrained in
Now,
there.
as luck
But
would have it, they did encounter new worlds
yeah, like you
that were
said
habitable,
a
and this
couple like
inspired a
last week
hope
or the
that
week
Necrontyr
before that
had never
I got
experienced before.
bit by the
Here was
hobby
their
bug.
chance to start again, to give their people a
just been
real fighting chance.
Binging,
However,
like taking care
fate
of
is
your
fickle, and
well,
the
not
curse of their
binging,
homeworld
but I watched a whole
followed them into
gang
the
of different
stars.
videos on
Now, many generations would
taking care
pass,
of your
and even though these
brushes,
colonizers were many light years
paints.
away from their
I
homeworld
checked out
sun,
some of those speed
its light
paints that
cast
you
a
that you
far-reaching
mentioned.
shadow, and the children born of these worlds
Speed
still displayed
paint.
signs of radiation sickness.
They're actually pretty
no matter how many
badass.
years passed,
I'm not
the
too
new
sure. Like
offspring's life
at
expectancy
first, I
remained
wasn't
the
liking
same.
how they
Just
looked,
because they had escaped their world,
but now
hadn't
I'm
meant that
like
they had
it's starting to
escaped its
grow
curse.
on me.
During this time, many new dynasties arose, and as luck would
Just
have it,
looked a
they
little
would encounter
odd
a
at
species
first to
known as
me,
the
like
Old
how it
Ones.
puddles, but
And
it
the two
doesn't
of
really
them couldn't
puddle
be more different from one another.
or something
The
like
Old
that.
Ones were a race of impossible alien intelligence. They were immortal beings that lived in prosperity
But
and were united
eventually
in the
we're
goal
gonna
of
try
seeding
everything
life
out.
throughout the universe. You see, the Old
We're
Ones
gonna
saw
try
themselves as
everything.
biological architects, guiding the evolution of the galaxy in the right
Yeah, at
direction.
first I didn't
They
really
would
like the
travel
look
from
that
planet
much.
to planet,
It looked
placing the
kinda
seeds of life upon each new world they
like, I
discovered.
don't know, just like
Now,
something
the
that
Necrontyr saw great potential in an alliance
I don't
between
know.
the two
Seeing it at
species
first, like somebody
and
wipe
begged
it
them
on
for
there, it's
assistance.
just like it
was
doesn't
truly
look
an
that
example
great.
of the
But
haves
seeing
and
the
the
finished
have-nots.
product, it's like,
The Old
oh,
Ones
dude, that
had
actually looks
everything,
pretty
and the
good, dude.
Necrontyr
And you
were
just
dying.
did that with
Their
speed
children
paint.
were dying.
Wow.
Their civilization would inevitably collapse, and like a gift
And then
from the
I also
gods,
saw people like
suddenly the Old Ones appeared
doing
to them. Now they
what
begged them
was
to
it?
share with them their secrets
Oh
of
wait, never
immortality.
mind.
They begged them to
I was
save
watching
their
other
children.
videos with
And above
airbrushing.
all, the rigid and proud Necrontyr dropped to their knees and begged
Yeah,
the strangers
like I
for
said, I
help.
got stuck on
And in a
watching
seeming
different
pattern of
things, different
misfortune,
videos,
the Old Ones refused them. Now, the Old Ones
blending
followed a code
paints,
very
and
similar
some
to the
people
Prime
just
Directive
buy
in
every
Star
colored
Trek,
paint.
choosing not to interfere with the destiny of the civilizations
Mind
they
if
encountered.
I
The Necrontyr were on their own, but they wished them the
speaking
best of luck.
opinion, you want
Something
to-
broke in the Necrontyr that day. Here were beings
Recommend-
capable
no, dude, recommend
of
away,
anything
I'm
that
way
lived
down.
forever,
Yeah,
that through
Russians
no
a whole
effort
different
could
beast.
save
Yeah,
them,
dude,
and yet they
for
were
sure.
refused.
Yeah,
The
I'm always down for
rage and
recommendations,
hatred
man.
the
Like,
Necrontyr felt for them cannot be understated. And with no thought of the seeming impossibility of such an action,
I'm a
the
student
Necrontyr
around here.
declared war on the Old Ones. As one could expect, this would not go well. The Old Ones had no desire to fight them, but would defend themselves. And they were vastly more advanced than the Necrontyr. Time
guy
after
looks alright
time,
for his
defeat
coat.
after
I'll switch
defeat,
it to
the
next
Necrontyr
guy,
were
the
pushed
last
back
guy.
and crushed against the
We'll do a
technological
second coat on
superiority
this guy
of the
now.
Old Ones. Now again, this was a war that the Old Ones
That's
had no
alright.
time for and didn't want to be
It's
involved in
alright
the
for
first
one
place,
coat, actually.
and at any point would have agreed to peace.
Might
But the
only need a
Necrontyr
second
were
coat.
relentless in their hatred, and the festering need for vengeance was growing
Let's
deeper
see.
and deeper
Try
with every
searching
defeat.
for Ultimate
Now, if any
Guide
good was
to
to have come
Painting
from
or
this
First
for the
Minister,
Necrontyr people,
everything you need to
it was that the
know
united
by
hatred of a
Squidmar.
singular enemy
You
brought
know,
all
I
of the
might have
dynasties
actually
together,
seen that one.
which before this,
No, we'll
wars
see, we'll
between
see.
them had
Hold
been rather commonplace.
Me.
Now the Necrontyr were
He's a
united in their
good
goal
dude.
of eradicating
Yeah,
the Old
Squidmar.
Ones. However, this
Wait,
seemed
does he wear
like
glasses?
nothing more than a dream of
I think I've seen
revenge,
him.
never to be brought to fruition. That was,
let
however,
me
until they
see.
encountered another species,
How much is left in
one
this
that
video?
rivaled the Old Ones in
When this
power
video's
and
over,
would prove to be the
we'll
polar
put that guy
opposite
on.
of them. A species with no desire to spread life, only to consume it. Ancient beings that had complete mastery over physical reality. Star gods of devastating and terrifying proportions.
Looks pretty
These
good.
entities
On camera,
were
it looks
known as
pretty
the
good.
Catan.
Right
Now,
here
how the
with,
Necrons
the
first made
naked
contact with them
eye.
is still a mystery.
A couple
Some say
spots
they
it
were
needs,
encountered by
but
the
it
study of
is looking
stars,
good.
while
Thank you, man.
others say the manifestation of the
He doesn't, but his
Necrontyr
mate
hatred
does. Okay.
acted like a beacon to them.
I've seen so many
However it
people do it. It's
Their meeting
wild.
would
I don't
fundamentally
know.
alter the course of history.
I've seen a bunch of
and
people
would
that are
give the
like
Necrontyr
very
people what
popular,
they
and
were
then
so
a
desperate
bunch of people that
power
don't have that
and
many views on
immortality.
their channels.
One of these beings came before the
Not that
Silent
many
King and proposed an
subscribers.
alliance. He said that they were familiar with the Old Ones, and much like the Necrontyr, they also had a deep hatred for them. He spun a tale
Ninja,
about
yeah,
how
yeah,
the
I've seen
Old
him
Ones
too, for
were
sure,
their
I've seen
ancient
him.
enemies, and for the galaxy to
What's the
prosper,
guy
they
with
must be
glasses?
purged.
Yeah.
The
He's
reality
also
is
good.
that the Catan
Yeah.
were
Yeah, I've
basically
seen a bunch of guys. I like also that other guy,
massive
the
beings
long
of
hair.
pure energy that would descend upon a
Eons
star and leech
of
out all of its energy,
Battle? Eons
condemning
of battle,
all
maybe?
life in its
Eons-
solar system to
Eons of
death.
something?
So great was the hunger
I like
of the
him. He's
Catan
pretty. He
that they
seems.
spread
He
across
seems
the
like a good
galaxy
dude
like a
too.
swarm of locusts, destroying all in their path. Their existence was antithetical to
Give
the
this guy
mission of the
another
Old Ones to
coat.
bring life to the galaxy.
One
and
more
thus the
coat.
Old Ones declared war on them, seeing their existence as nothing short of blasphemous. Needless to say, this was not the story the Silent King was told. However, this great lie would prove to be fitting, as that entity's
I
name
got
would
his
later
arm.
be
Whoops.
known as the Deceiver.
Oh, he went out
So
of
the
the line again.
Necrontyr would
Whoops.
come to accept
Oh,
the
well.
Deceiver's offer, and thus crafted for him and all the other Catan bodies of living metal. Now, this was made out of a stuff called necrodermis, which was one of the inventions of the Necrontyr that they used in their starships. Now, this would inevitably be used to construct the metal
Necrodermis.
forms of the Necrons we know today, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now, before
Yeah,
this,
he's
the
a chill dude
Catan
as
were
well.
basically
Yeah, dude.
beings of pure energy, and with their newfound bodies, they were able to experience the physical universe on a level they never had before. Now, this alliance would prove fruitful for the Necrontyr as well, because the Catan gave them remarkable gifts. Now, the powers of these individuals were like that of gods. They created for the Necrontyr weapons and machines that they could only dream of. Invigorated by their newfound discoveries, their lust for war was once again ignited. The Necrontyr were so enraptured by the power of the star gods that they actually began to worship them. And this makes sense because from the
I
Necrontyr's
brought
perspective, the
myself a
Catan were their
Q-tip
saviors.
so I could clean
and
up
through
where I
their
went out of the
power would they
line.
deliver the wrath of the Necrontyr people upon all that stood before them. The high and mighty Old Ones, who despite their self-proclaimed benevolence, condemned their people to a slow
Maybe I
and
shouldn't
agonizing
use the
death,
Q-tip.
and would soon pay for their
It
hubris.
doesn't really help.
The combined might of the Catan and the Necrontyr would see their empires burn to ash, and the great legacy that they thought to craft for themselves lost to the annals of time, all records of them purged from existence, so none would remember that such a species ever even existed. Now, the technology level and overall military might of the Necrontyr
That's
skyrocketed
what's so
practically
funny about the
overnight.
hobby.
With the
Everyone
power of
has
the
their own
Catan
way
and their
to
immensely
enjoy it.
destructive
Yeah,
weapons
dude.
of war, all would bow
I like
before
this.
the
I haven't-
combined might of the gods
And, you know,
of the
there's always,
physical
like,
universe and
I
their
haven't seen
esteemed mortal
any
followers. But the
people
Catan
that
had
are
made
like,
two promises to the Necrontyr people. That of power,
I don't
but
know.
also of immortality. The next
People
gift that
that
they
say, "Oh, you
proposed
gotta
would
do it
rid their
like this,
people
or
of their
else you're
frail and
dumb or
sickly
something."
forms.
You're dumb
They
or
would be
something.
forever
Everybody
free from
in the-
disease and suffering.
this hobby and
The
this whole
Necrontyr would become gods in their own right
this
and
whole
would build
thing,
kingdoms
everybody's
that
been pretty
would never
cool.
die, and all it would cost them was their souls. Monolithic towering furnaces were constructed on
Hopefully
every
it'll
world
stay that
would
way.
burn away their withered frames and replace it with bodies of living metal, the same material that the Catan now inhabited. Now, the first to undergo the process of biotransference, as it would later be called, was none other than the Silent King himself. Now, he
Alright,
strode into the
dude.
furnace, and all that he ever was burned away
Came
and
out of the lines
replaced
a
with
little
undying
bit, but
metal.
other than
The
just
process
that
was a
little bit, it's
success.
looking
He felt
alright.
power that no Necrontyr had ever felt before. He was strong, vital, and his mind was operating faster than he even thought possible. But there was something deeply wrong. Something deep inside him was missing. It was like he was looking at the world from behind glass. He had newfound power and freedom, unlike anything his people had ever experienced before. But something was deeply wrong. He felt empty and hollow. The realization of what he had done and what he had committed his people to slowly dawned on him. He had no soul. He was now
Damn.
nothing more than an engram copy of consciousness stored on an immortal robot. This process would be repeated billions of times over on thousands of worlds. His people were plunged into the fires of biotransference, their bodies disintegrated and their souls ripped apart by the gorging feasting of the gluttonous Catan. For you see, the Catan did in fact wish to provide what they had promised. However, the energy of
This one
suns
might
had
actually
long
need
since
another
being
coat
appealing to
after
them,
this.
and they instead
One more
found
coat for
newfound
this.
joy in feasting on a different energy altogether.
They
the
probably
souls
will
of
need
the
the
living.
3.
Now, some
The
individuals
3 that it
walked into the furnace
recommends.
of their own free will, as it was their ruler's will to do so. Others were dragged in, kicking and screaming. It mattered not, as eventually it was done.
Some might
Biotransference
enjoy
of the
building,
entire
painting,
species
and playing,
had been a
while some might
success.
enjoy the
And
painting
on that
and
day,
love the building,
The
minis.
Necrontyr,
Yeah, no,
died.
I actually
confined to the halls of
who was I
history,
watching?
another name in the vast book
I
of
actually think I was
extinct
watching the
species,
Eons
and standing
guy,
amongst
Eons
their
of Battle,
ashes
and he was saying,
only the Necrons. Now, the Deceiver had one final gift for the Silent King. For of all his desires, the mightiest was for his people to be unified.
I don't remember.
And
Actually, I don't
wished that the
remember who
Catan
it
made
was,
more
but somebody was
possible than
saying that they
anyone
don't
could have
like.
thought, as all of the Necrons had installed in them command protocols. That meant they could
I
not
can't remember.
physically
I don't want
disobey
to
him.
quote anybody
On
now.
one hand, the Silent King was completely
But
horrified
yeah,
by this.
yeah. Some people
He
like
realized
more
the depth
one
of
thing
what
than
he
the
had
other.
done, and in doing such, he had doomed his
Believe it or
entire
not, some
species.
people don't even touch
But it
the
is not
minis.
like the
They're
Necrons to
more
look back.
happy
A
to
king
enjoy
does
the
not
books
make
and
mistakes.
more.
And a
Wow,
king
yeah,
marches
yeah, I
forward.
hear that.
The Silent King controlled the most powerful
Well,
army the
I
galaxy
only
had
heard
ever
about
seen.
it because the
And
game
this
came
army,
out and people
along
were
with
playing
its
the
patron
game on,
gods,
you know,
took
on
to the
on
stars and their
Twitch and on
mighty tomb
YouTube,
ships
and
to bring a war
oh, this
unlike
looks
anything the
badass.
galaxy
But
had ever seen
I'm not
to their
down for people
ancient
that
enemies.
copied
And
Gears
the
of
empire
War.
of the
Wait,
old
Gears of
ones
War copied
would
them?
inevitably
What?
burn.
All right, let's check it
combined
out.
might of the immortal
What? Where have
armies
I
of the
been? Under a
Necrons
rock?
and their
You
godlike
know what I mean?
powers of the Catan brought war upon the Old Ones and their
David.
kingdoms for countless millennia, eventually pushing the Old Ones nearly to complete extinction. Driven by a need for vengeance, the Necrons burned millions of worlds, while the Catan feasted on the souls of the living. Countless lesser races created by the Old Ones were eradicated by the Necrons, while their gods gorged on their souls, erasing them completely from existence. Now, it was at this time that two major turning points occurred. The first was that the Catan began to war with each other for dominance over their siblings. Their hubris was so great that they each thought themselves the mightiest. They turned on each other one by one until only a handful were left. Now, the Old Ones took advantage of this infighting and began to create warrior races. Now, their creations before this point were given the choice to make their own paths
Yeah, dude, the
and
lore,
develop
the
in
universe
accordance
is
with their
wild.
own
It's
individual
way dope.
destinies.
I'm
However,
down
these
for
were
this lore.
incredibly desperate times, and races specifically crafted for war were needed. The Old Ones created the Orcs and the Eldari, one massive hulking brutes, each bearing the might of an entire army in a single individual. The ancient ancestors of the Orcs were actually known as the Krorks and stood around 13 meters tall. Not to mention, it was highly likely that the Krorks had a fundamental understanding of their reality-bending powers and were able to fully utilize them to great effect. The Eldari, on the other hand, were massively powerful psychers, and each one had an innate connection to the warp. These new races would spread across the galaxy, battling and pushing back the Necrons wherever they were encountered. And as it turns out, the powers of the warp were unbelievably effective against the Catan. You see, they were gods of the physical universe and had no link to the Immaterium. They had no ability to deny such raw and devastating psychic attacks. The combined might of the Old Ones, the Eldar, and the Krorks pushed back against the Necrons and their sinister masters. Now, this is a time period that is incredibly shrouded in mystery, and it's on a scale unlike anything we've ever seen before. Imagine a singular war that spanned the entirety of the galaxy. Now, the one that we know in the 41st millennium is a galaxy that has millions of wars happening simultaneously, but there are vast sectors of space that are seemingly peaceful, or are at least removed from the greater conflict. Now, this was a battle that raged across all of the stars. We can't even really comprehend just how immense it was, or how many unique individuals were involved. There must have been millions of heroes, each with countless war stories that could fill entire libraries. Now, the Warhammer universe has around 600 novels written so far, and this time period could probably have far more than that written about it. It was so immense that it is aptly named the War in Heaven.
Funny,
now,
dude,
at one point during the war, the Catan tried to push back against the psychic onslaught by creating massive pylons made of Blackstone. These were constructed on hundreds, if not thousands, of worlds across the galaxy.
We'll watch it tomorrow.
You see, Blackstone is a material that cannot be affected by warp sorcery,
but yeah,
and thus was constructed to try to tamper the enemy's ability to change.
And boy, how wrong am I?
These pylons were used to hold back the warp. Which before this, the
Sea
of Souls was actually a pretty tranquil place compared to the warp that we know today in the 41st millennium. It was the absolute onslaught of souls pouring into the warp day after day, and the unbridled fury and hatred of quintillions of individuals locked in internal conflict that began to make the Sea of Souls into a roaring maelstrom. The once tranquil denizens of the warp turned into twisted monstrosities, its once peaceful tides becoming a twisted, chaotic nightmare of pain and suffering. The warp became a sick reflection of itself and came to be known as the Realm of Chaos. Unfortunately for the Old Ones, a combination of the might of the Catan, their legions of Necron soldiers, and the dark and twisted warp manifestations that their own creations had unleashed, in the end proved to be too much for even the godlike Old Ones. As their kingdoms burned, the Old Ones disappeared from existence. Whether or not every one of them met their end during this period, or they fled our galaxy, it still remains a mystery. But the Old Ones were gone, and the Necrons had finally achieved their vengeance. But this wasn't the end of the War in Heaven, for you see, the entire time the war had been going on, the Silent King had planned his revenge on a second enemy. The Catan had lied. They had tricked him into betraying his own people. And a king lets no slight against his subjects go unanswered. Zar commanded the Necrons to turn on their gods, and for all their intelligence and all their power. This was something the Catan were incapable of predicting, as they were hubris made manifest. The very concept that their subjects could rise against them was anathema to them. The Necrons harnessed weaponry of god-killing power and shattered all of the Catan into thousands of individual fragments. Each one was then locked in a tesseract vault, so it could never again be free to roam the stars, chained forever by those who they once ruled over. The fate of the Catan was to be eternally shackled to the war machines of the Necrons. In the far future, their essence would be used to bring devastation to distant battlefields. But for now, they would remain prisoners. Now, after this was done, the Silent King contemplated what to do next. Both of his great enemies had been utterly destroyed. However, the galaxy was in turmoil. Warp-spawned monstrosities known as the Enslavers were running rampant throughout the galaxy. In addition, the Eldar had rose to prominence and were incredibly powerful. The Necrons had been solely focused on wiping out the Old Ones, and it had cost them an enormous portion of their population. In their weakened state, they had no hope of defeating the Eldari and reclaiming the stars. With this in mind, the Silent King ordered the construction of vast tomb complexes on all of their worlds that dug deep within the earth. It was there that he ordered his people to rest, to sleep for millions of years. It was the Eldar who would inherit the galaxy, and there was nothing they could do to stop this. But the Necrons know more than anyone else that time is an enemy to all but the Necrons. For their immortal forms could never truly die, and the Eldar Empire would rise and fall, just as all empires do. The Silent King set the clock to awaken 60 million years in the future, to inherit whatever was left of the galaxy. The Eldar would be long dead, and whatever new species had crawled its way out of the primordial ooze would not be ready to face the Necrons, and they would once again take their rightful place as the rulers of the galaxy. After all the Necrons were locked in stasis, the Silent King had one thing left to do to atone for his sins. He severed the command protocols. The will of the Necron people would be theirs once again, and upon their awakening, they would finally be free. After doing this, he exiled himself. He hopped in a ship and took off for the void of space. What he hoped to find out there between the stars is known only to him, but he vowed to return, to see his people as they awoke once more. It is now the 41st millennium. The alarm clock has finally gone off. One by one, the surviving tomb worlds are coming back online. Memories from 60 million years ago still fresh in the minds of the newly awoken overlords. And with their free will reestablished, the dynasties are no longer united in all things. But they do, however, agree on one, that the galaxy belongs only to them. And the verminous filth that has come to inhabit it must be completely and utterly eradicated. So if you enjoyed
crazy,
this
dude.
video, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be making a lot more long form lore videos like this, as well as all the little short form ones that I've.
All right, let's see. What was it called? Searching for ultimate guide, painting your first miniatures, everything you know by Squidmar. Let's see. Use them in battle. You should have a look at the Void Dragon. Void Dragon, is it a video? Should I look it up as a video? Or just like a picture of it? The Void Dragon. I'm gonna do it the quicker way because it's my PlayStation. If I don't have a keyboard for the PlayStation, so if I look up a video, I have to like type it out one letter at a, well, obviously one letter at a time, but using a controller, it's kind of slow. So I'm gonna look it up on the phone and then go to the history of the. Hang on, just give me a second. Widmar. Ultimate Guide to Painting. Miniatures. Alright, Ultimate Guide to Painting Your First Miniature. Everything you need to know by Squidmar. Everything you need to know. 2 years ago, 43 minutes and 1 second. This guy, right? That's pretty much it. Let's see. Let's go for it. Do not, it's a mini. That's it. Alright, let's check this one out. It's just a mini, a picture, off air. Just do it. That's it. Okay, cool. Alright, so now we got the video. Whoops. Now we'll go to the history. Yeah. Alright.
Beginner, that's really tough. So today is the day where we show you how everything is done. From buying your first miniature and assembling that like a pro, priming it, basing it, and painting it. And that is including all of the tools and products that we recommend that we've been using over the past 5 years. And even picking out the right miniature for your paint jobs. Chapter 1. Buying the right miniature. The first thing we need to figure out is, why am I painting miniatures?
Damn, that looks sick!
Well, then you've probably narrowed down your selections to the game that you're going to play. The two biggest games using miniatures are definitely from Games Workshop, Warhammer 40,000 and Age of Sigmar. But there's also tons of smaller miniature games like Conquest by Parabellum Games and Moonstone the Game. But there's also tons of miniature that aren't for games. And personally, I enjoy painting those maybe even more than the gaming miniatures.
Was something
Some of my favorite brands
really complicated? Would it be better to paint it first and then glue it together, or always glue it together first and then paint it? I know we mentioned it last week, but
currently running a Kickstarter releasing our
I don't know,
first
man.
75mm
Something like
line
that
of
seems like you'd want to
miniatures.
paint it first.
And these display miniatures are sci-fi elves, mystical orcs, and a necromantic human race. And if you want to check that out, I will put all of those links down in the video description, because these are pretty freaking awesome. If you're one of those that's buying a miniature that's not for gaming, it is very important to not just select a miniature that looks cool.
We're gonna do this. We're gonna do it this way enough time, and then maybe one day in the future I'll paint them first and then glue them together.
With the paintbrush. And if you're a beginner, that's really
see how
tough.
it comes out.
If you check out the brands that I've mentioned earlier, as well as the ones that we've designed ourselves, we've made sure that the miniatures have well-sculpted features. And when you pick a miniature like that, the brush will pretty much follow the shape of the miniature, meaning that you will not have to fight against the sculpt to create something pretty. And painting a miniature like this will not only be easier, but you'll probably have a much better end result than if you pick a miniature that has tons of details that just cover up all of the shapes of the mini. And with that, you will also become a better painter. An example of this is what I like to call the classic balloon muscles, where there's pretty much just bulges representing muscles on the miniature, as opposed to something, say, sculpted by Jacqueline Palacios, where the muscles are sculpted realistic, yet still keeping the fantasy vibes. Another big issue that I found with a lot of these miniatures is that they are over-designed.
I want to learn how to do that first for sure on its own, because it melts the glue together, and if you do it right, supposedly there's like not even a seam there, you know? Is what I hear.
With not just metal armor, it also have patterns over all of the armor. It also have gemstones, it has backpacks, it has tassels on the backpack, and it has emeralds on the tassels. It has a cow on the helmet with horns and tassels on the helmet.
Okay, I'm down.
Painting this as opposed to this one will definitely not only take more time, but will also probably make you a less good painter if you're just starting out. So start off simple and give yourself easy wins.
Yeah, I've seen a good few videos from this guy.
The two most common materials we work with as miniature painters is
not sure what videos I saw, but
and resin.
Like I said, I got on a little big binge of just watching people do stuff and recommending things.
And the Conquest miniatures. While the smaller boutique brands that produce smaller quantities of minis like these ones, as well as the Moonstone ones, are made in resin. Over the last couple of years, there's also been the addition of 3D printing, and that gives us a huge possibility to find unique miniatures and print them in our home the same day that we find them. And to me, it's just awesome how many creative miniatures we have to select from. This is a box of Gore-Chosen of Drom, a warband of miniatures from the game Warhammer Underworlds. A perfect start if you want to dip your toes into Warhammer without spending a few $100s for an entire army. This one costs about $30. When you bring out your sprues, they come out looking something like this. And if you're lucky, the miniatures you purchased included an instruction on how to build them like this one. But when you purchase display minis or miniatures from smaller brands, that might not be the case. But when it comes to building Games Workshop miniatures, I always recommend following the guide, because many times there are parts that you might not be able to add if you don't add them at the right time.
How did I miss those couple?
You'll need a set of clippers, a hobby knife, and glue. You can start your hobby journey by buying cheap clippers, or maybe even using tools that you have at home from other projects. But trust me when I say there are advantages to buying better clippers with a flat side that go through plastic almost like it's butter. Just like this one from Redgrass Games. When you cut your miniature from the sprue, you want to be able to put the flat side of the clippers as close as possible to the model. If you have an unsharp tool, you will either end up with stress marks like this one going into the miniature, and if you don't have a flat side, you'll end up with leftover bits like in this case. And that is where you bring out your sharp hobby knife. A new sharp blade is always preferred to scrape off any leftover parts on the miniature. It is incredibly important to remove any of these type of leftover bits on miniatures, especially if this leftover is on an area that will be connected to a different part later. Because if you leave this one on, you will be left with a major gap once you glue these two parts together. And that can make your miniature look really funky sometimes.
Oh, damn.
And once you're done cutting your miniature apart, you're going to end up with sprues like this, with maybe some bits left over, and of course all of the plastic from the edges. The extra bits you can save for later if you want to. Maybe have some conversion ideas for the next figure you're gonna buy, where you can reuse the weapons for that figure. And the edges of the frame, well, either you throw these out,
I'll fix them up later
if you live in a place where they can recycle polystyrene, or you save them for something we're gonna do in a later step. Just hang on, we're gonna get to that. On any miniature you purchase, whether it's from Games Workshop or the hand-cast miniatures like these ones, there's always risk for something called mold lines. And that is created when the two different molds are pushed together and the plastic or resin is injected to that mold. Some of that resin or plastic is going to seep through in between the two different molds that are pressed together. The by far easiest way to remove this is by scraping it off with the hobby knife. But another one of my favorite ideas is by using a nail file sanding sponge. Not the hard ones, but the softer ones that's kind of squishy. You can also get these sponge strips that are great for reaching into tighter areas. And personally, I prefer scraping off any mold lines before I start building, because sometimes, depending on the miniature design, it's going to be difficult to scrape off the mold lines once you've started gluing the miniature together. Before we add any glue, I always recommend to test fit the parts, because that way you'll know where you need to add the glue. Also, you'll know if you need to cut off any extra parts before you start adding the glue. And if you're using resin models, there might be some parts that are warped that's gonna need some sanding. And again, with Games Workshop kits, often they are quite over-designed, so it has happened not just once that I've put glue in the wrong place, and when I finally add the part to the miniature, I was supposed to add the glue to a completely different area. Okay, so the miniatures are cut up, they're cleaned up, they're ready to be glued together. When building polystyrene miniatures, my favorite sort of glue is plastic cement, also known as plastic glue. I've got a few different brands from Army Painter, Tamiya, and Citadel. My favorite one is definitely this one from Citadel, as it's got a really nice metal tip that helps me control where I get the plastic glue. If we get it in areas where it's not supposed to be, it's going to muddy up the miniature and melt some of that plastic. Yeah. Because that is pretty much its purpose. It's going to melt the two different parts together in sort of a weld, and when it's hardened, it is like there's never been a gap between the two areas. Nice. And unless you cut it apart, the parts are not separating. The other reason I really like the plastic cement is because the gaps you get when putting two parts together pretty much vanishes when you use the right amount of plastic glue. But there's also good reason to pick up the Tamiya plastic cement. If you have leftover plastic bits, you can cut these apart and add them to the plastic cement. This will dissolve all of the plastic and will create something that we call sprue goo. This is pretty much liquid plastic that you can use as glue or filling for smaller gaps.
Damn, dude. If you got like a straight crack in it, you gotta fill it in. Yeah, that's so smart.
You're going to have to use super glue or cyanoacrylates. Again, there are tons of different brands. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the Gorilla Glue, and the Loctite one is quite expensive. So usually I go to dollar stores and pick up some cheap super glue. The favorite one in the office is from Biltema, which is a hardware store that sells them together with super glue activator. Outside of that, I don't feel like super glue needs any more detailed introduction. Just add the glue to one of the parts and put them together. Unfortunately, because it's not melting the two parts together like the plastic glue, we're often going to get something called gaps.
Yup. Yup.
And these gaps can be filled with a few different things, either the sprue glue that we mentioned earlier, or you can use something called green stuff, milliput, liquid putty, liquid green stuff, or just regular wood/PVA glue if you have that at home. I found that there's a place for all of these different techniques, but my favorite one to use when I really want to get nice miniatures is milliput. The milliput is a two-component modeling epoxy. You've got the paste and the activator. Mix the two together in equal parts into the amount you need and push it in place. It's easy to use, easy to move around, and most of the times I don't even have to sand it to have a smooth transition between the milliput and the miniature itself.
That's pretty cool.
You can moisten any sculpting tool that you have so that it won't stick to your tool, and just shape it in the way that you want. And when you're going to blend the milliput against the figure and using a brush, don't use an expensive brush. Maybe you have some old hobby tool from an IKEA paint kit or something like that, or dollar store brushes that you can use.
Yeah,
and remember to clean up the brush after you've used it against milliput, because otherwise it's going to be ruined forever. Easiest to use is definitely the plastic putty, which you just squeeze out of the bottle where the gap is.
Advanced
and then
techniques,
remove
yeah,
any
I'm down.
excess.
I'm down to even like learn advanced techniques as I go. That way,
parts. Okay, with that we have both.
That way, it's not something I mean, I'll always be learning something,
amazing, but they're still missing the most important part.
I want to learn as much as I can now.
Incoming dishes.
I don't know what I'm trying to say, man. I want to have all tips and tricks at my disposal, I guess. Yeah, buddy.
Way before I even started this YouTube channel, I picked up my first Red Guys Games wet palette. And I fell in love. And now I come full circle because now they are paying me to talk about the product that I already purchased myself. And earlier this year, they released version 2 of their wet palette. And they've listened to the audience. Not only have they made their smallest wet palette slightly bigger, but they've also made the big one a little bit deeper. And the foam is about 50% thicker, which means that you can fill it with more water and it will last longer until you have to refill it. And to me, that means that they are serious about continuously making the best wet palette even better. To me though, the best thing is the new membrane. This is the wet palette paper, and not only does the paint last longer on it and it's easier to work with, because over the past 8 months we've tried it and it's clearly superior to the old ones, but it's completely unique because the best thing is that you can actually clean the wet palette paper and reuse it. The pre-order for this wet palette and the smaller one just went live. So if you want to be among the first one to get it that wasn't part of the Kickstarter, you can just follow the link down below. I promise you will not be disappointed. This is a terrific product. And now let's get back to teaching you how to paint. And now we're going to dive deep into the most common techniques.
You use that exact same one? Dope, dude. And do you stand by it?
There's quite a few tools you need to paint your first
it's insane.
Miniature.
Nice,
first,
nice.
obvious one is a brush. There's a few different ways to go at it, but if you don't have a strict budget, I always recommend to start with 3 different brushes. The first one is a exactly paintbrush. This is a brush made from natural hair, and the reason you buy one, it's got an unmatched precision. The tip is the sharpest one you can get for miniature painting, and it keeps the tip sharp for a very long time.
Breaks from painting and the paints are still usable?
With that wet palette, dude, really? Paint in the bristles of the brush much better than a synthetic
my wet palette, and the last probably one, because I use wax paper. I don't have parchment paper.
The brush, the way that it follows the shape on miniatures,
it bleeds through the paper,
any synthetic brush that I've ever tried.
See what I mean?
So once you've tried a really good Kolinsky brush, you won't
like it doesn't even look like it bled through. Well, it does on the camera, I guess, but with the naked eye, it doesn't look like it bled through the wax paper.
Synthetic brush.
But it definitely
I buy
did.
these from a dollar store or a hardware store, 10-pack for maybe $7. But previously, I've also purchased stuff from Amazon and Wish, and all of them have worked greatly for the purpose this brush is gonna have. Because where the Kolinsky brush is like a Ferrari, you cannot drive it on a forest road, but when you're on the racetrack, it's unmatched in speed and precision. The synthetic brush is your tractor. It's gonna do all of the dirty work. It's going to be perfect for painting areas where you can't reach with the Kolinsky brush without breaking the bristles, and just generally stuff that's bad for the brush, like washes, contrast paints, and metallic paints. But when you want to paint details, like getting the final highlights, or maybe painting eyes or tiniest stuff on the miniature, the Kolinsky brush
look how
is gonna
small.
be unmatched.
Look how big his finger is, dude.
One of each of
how
these
big his finger is compared.
Oh my goodness. Paint for a very long time without having to purchase another brush.
That's crazy
the last brush
small.
I like to recommend people to get is a dry brush. My painting technique don't include a lot of dry brushing, but for beginners, I feel like it's a great way to bring out detail quite fast without having to learn a lot about light and light placement. I would recommend you to get a cheap makeup brush, but you can also use a old broken synthetic brush for this as well. But you don't ever want to use your Kolinsky brush for dry brushing, because dry brushing destroys any brush that
dude, it's been exactly an hour since I checked it last.
If you like dry brushing a lot, there are
serious right now?
dry
So I just did two. I did the white in 1 hour, and then I did the purple in another hour. Wild. It's like they planned for it to be like that, dude.
Paint. And to start with that, a
But
primer.
I'm slow as hell
a
too,
primer
so that
helps
might
seal
be
the material that you're painting on, and it
it.
also gives a better adhesion for the paints that you're gonna add with the brush. And the ones that I mostly use to this day
brushes.
are
Yeah, the
spray
brushes were
can
pretty cool, dude.
primers. I just find that these
yeah,
stick the best, and it's the fastest
definitely
thing
gonna
to
keep
use. And when
keep going on my
primer,
cheap
there's a few
brushes.
different ways to go
And I'll use the
at
nice
it.
ones
If you're
definitely
painting
for
an
that
army
detail,
where
and
all
not
of the
for
figures are going
metallic.
to be red or blue, maybe the best way to go is to buy a
the
blue
other two
spray
things
can
he said.
primer that can work as the base
We're learning,
color
we're going,
for
we're
your
going.
army. If If you're more like me, you like working from the shadows and up, I prefer starting with a black primer. We've tried so many different brands of primer,
I gotta
and
get,
the finest ones we found
I'm just
are
I'm using with what I got.
Vallejo,
So it's not bad.
but
It's
the
not
Army
bad.
Painter one is quite good as well. It doesn't quite have the same pressure, but the color and the adhesion is really good.
I swear by dry brushing. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna learn how to dry brush too. I'm gonna get there. I have some dry brushes, but there's like the nice dry brushes that we're not gonna use right away.
Different reasons.
But I could always use like
the main reason that I often
one of
do
these,
it's
the
to
dry
create
brush.
a volumetric base priming on your miniature.
One of the cheap 99-cent store
point of the miniature
ones.
is going to be raised towards zenith, which would be the sky, where the light mostly come from. And it will leave the shadows darker. This is awesome if you're using translucent paints or inks to paint your figure. It kind of gives you free highlights and shadows, but it also gives you a higher saturation in the highlights because the brighter the undercoat you have, the more of the color of your next layers is going to shine through. And having a completely white undercoat priming your miniatures white gives you a much more vibrant tone, especially if you're using colors that have a quite poor pigmentation. Usually that's colors like orange, red, and yellow. Another reason why I really like using is because it helps bring out the details.
Old rune brushes,
eyes are not
exactly
quite what they used to be, so having white from
zenithal
really
highlights, dude, the black,
all of the different
the
details
white
on the
on black
miniatures really are,
for
as
lighting,
opposed to when everything
so
is
you know
just
where
matte
you're.
black.
Yeah.
Let's get to the regular paints.
I saw somebody. I think it was
In today's
Eon's
hobby,
guy.
there are
He
so
had
many
like
different paints and so many different types of
he was
brands.
kit
All of
bashing,
them
so
have
he had
their
like
purpose,
different
but today we want
pieces,
to break it
but
down and make
he
it a little
taped
bit more
them all
accessible.
to be the
three
same
most
position
common ones are
as
regular acrylics, washes,
the light would be hitting
and
them, and then he painted them and then put them together. I think is
dipping
what he did.
inks, depending on which brand you're gonna buy. But there is also enamels and
I don't
oils,
need any more
but we're going to
purple.
leave
Purple
those
looks
out
good.
for today
No more
because for a
purple. We're
beginner,
gonna
the
get
regular
into the
acrylics,
black. We're
washes,
gonna use
and contrast
black.
paints
Yeah,
are way enough.
we wanted to keep this stream at the 2-hour mark. But we're gonna use the black real quick just to do the little bit of black, and then we'll call it a night.
These are regular paints that you're going to layer upon your miniature. Most of them cover quite decently, and you can mix them like any normal paint to get new colors or new variations of colors. And in my opinion, really the only must-haves. On this channel, previously we've done a massive test,
I don't need to clean out my water. I don't think. Do you think I should clean out my water?
And we came to the conclusion that for a beginner, the most easy brands to start with is either Vallejo Model Color or Citadel. But we also really enjoyed the AK Interactive 3rd generation paints as a beginner paint. And washes is a type of low viscosity paint that seeps into the cracks and crevices. And the most common usage is recess shading, meaning that you're adding a darker color into all of the areas that are folded on your miniatures, leaving the raised areas the same brightness as they were before. The second biggest usage is to use it as a glaze, meaning that you paint something with a really thinned down color to either just slightly color something or to smoothen out a transition between two different areas. The last type of paint we're going to talk about is something called contrast paints. It is named that because the first brand that came with this paint named it that. But other brands like Army Painter call them speed paints or Green Stuff World dipping inks. Vallejo also have one coming up, but it's not quite released yet. This is a low viscosity, high pigment, translucent paint. The purpose of this paint is pretty much to give you a one-coat paint that leaves you with a highlight, a shadow, and a mid-tone. And it's often used over a white primer, or if you want to use its full potential, over a zenithal highlighted miniature. This will leave the most raised areas the highlight tone. The mid-tone, the part between the shadow, this area will also be the most saturated as it's a translucent and vibrant paint over a white primer. And in the shadows, you will still have the same shadow tone that you had from your priming. And this type of paint is awesome if you're painting a lot of miniatures. Maybe you're batch painting an army, or maybe you have 20 figures to finish for the Dungeons & Dragons game this evening. With the contrast paints and speed paints, you're going to have something that looks quite good with just one coat. But if you're getting into painting at a higher level or want to paint for competitions, contrast paints are more like a complement to the regular acrylics. A great way to add your first coat that you're then gonna have to work up on later.
Yeah, dude,
and in
that
my
looks wild.
opinion,
All of that
combining
looks
the two
wild.
is almost like cheating. It gets you great looking miniatures in a really short amount of time.
That looks crazy.
But the big problem, it's gonna be quite pricey to start out buying both acrylics and speed paints.
Wet palette again? Are we on a different
almost
video?
ready to paint our first
No,
miniature. But first, we need to talk about the wet palette. Outside of getting a brush with a really nice tip, this is going to be the most powerful tool in your arsenal. If you paint directly out of the pot, the paint is going to be too thick and you're going to get blobs of paint that's going to remove some of the detail on your miniature. There are three major reasons for using one. The first one being that it can keep your paints moist for a long painting session. It can stay wet for hours instead of just minutes, especially if you're living in an environment where it's a very dry air like Sweden in the winters or maybe Texas in the summers. The second reason is that it's a lot easier to mix paints because the paints are going to stay wet during your entire painting session, meaning that you can add all the paints you're going to use on the palette before you start. With this, you can also mix the paint between one another, meaning that you don't have to open up pots and add paint and mix them, and then when you're going to use the same mix the next time, it's already dried. And the third one, and the biggest one, it's so much easier to control the consistency of the paint, meaning that if you want to paint with a layer consistency, you can do that, and if you want to create a glaze, you can do that directly on the palette with your brush instead of having to mix a glaze of paints every time you're gonna do a glaze. It's all just gonna happen seamlessly. So what is really a wet palette? Well, it's pretty much just three things. It's a sponge filled with water, it's also a tray where the sponge is gonna be lying, and it's a paper that just lets a little bit of water through all the time. Just a perfect amount to keep the paint wet. You can purchase wet palettes. This is my favorite one from Redgrass Games. We've done a big test and this one just came out as the single best one, at least in our opinion. But they do cost a bit, so when you're starting out, I definitely recommend you to just make one at home. My recommendation for a beginner is to find a low plastic box. I then add a cellulose sponge cloth and fill that with water. For Europeans, this is something that pretty much everyone have in their everyday home. The most common one is from the brand Vetex. For Americans and people from outside of Europe, you can find these on Amazon. These are just on another level compared to using like a regular sponge or something like that, because they can stay moist for so much longer than a regular sponge and keeps more water. And the last thing we're gonna add is parchment paper. Not the waxy one, because that one doesn't let enough water through, but the regular just parchment paper. And this is a perfectly fine wet palette. When I started painting, I used this for like 6 to 9 months something before I purchased my first wet palette. Because when you're getting started, maybe it's more fun to have more paints than spend 60 bucks on a nice wet palette. And if you live in a place where you just can't get hold of these sponges, don't worry, buy a regular sponge that's thin, or the even more DIY way is to use regular paper tissue. This works, but it doesn't hold the water for as long, so it's more of like a temporary one that you replace the next day you're getting started. Okay, my guys, we're ready to start painting. We got all of the tools, you know how they work, you know how to use them. And I'm going to paint 3 different miniatures with you today, showing the 3 different most common techniques that used for miniature painting. We start off by bringing out the wet palette and adding all of the colors we're going to use for the session on the palette. Something that can tremendously help in your painting journey is a good daylight balanced painting light, as our eyes are so much better at seeing details and colors in daylight. So just switching out your regular desk light lamp bulb for a daylight balanced one is the perfect start. We're going to start off with our cheap synthetic brush. Wick the brush into water to moisten it. We then remove any excess water. And the most common way of doing that, no matter how disgusting we think it is to remove the water in your mouth. This also helps me reshape the brush, but if you find that a bit nasty, then you can remove any excess paint on either a piece of cloth or a paper tissue. And the brush should just be slightly moist like this. It follows the shape of my hand when I move it around and it doesn't split. And I want my first painted layers to be of layer consistency. So to get the right control, how do you do that? Well, we're only going to dip the brush about halfway into the paint. We then stir the paint gently into the brush on the wet palette. With this, we remove any excess paint and we get the paint into the belly and the reservoir of the brush. And this is the perfect time to check the consistency on the back of your thumb. If it's thin like this, you've created a glaze. That means that it's too thin for our initial layers.
I haven't done any of that
enough paint into the brush.
Thumb trick.
If it's like this, you have a perfect layer consistency.
gotta try that. I gotta do that more often.
With the
Get
regular
into the
and
habit
most
of doing
common
it.
way of painting. Maybe we can call it the Games Workshop style of miniature painting. We got our primed miniature and are going to start off by blocking out the colors. I like to start with the ones that's covering the biggest area. And some paints don't cover enough, meaning that you have to paint it 2 or 3 layers before you have a full coverage. But before we add another layer, we need to make sure that the miniature dries fully. Otherwise, we risk to reactivate the paint and remove that paint from the previous layer, leaving us with some areas that's gonna have patches of the primer shining through. This is how the miniature looks after 1 layer and 1 coat and about 3-4 minutes of drying. And really, you don't have to wait 3-4 minutes to be able to continue your painting, because while the first layer is drying, you can start painting another area. On this miniature, we're also just going to start with the mid-tones, and the reason for that is because we want to add the shadows in a later step and the highlights after that. Meaning no super dark colors and no super bright ones. So with the basic skin tone added in 2 separate layers, we have something looking like this. Now we just gotta add the base coats to all of the other parts of the miniature. With green pants, beige gray rocks.
Let that guy dry.
We're also giving him somewhat of a blonde hair and using that same color for all of the ropes. And lastly, a dark brown for his horns. And as you've seen on all of these shots, the colors that we've added bar from the horns are all mid-tone. No dark colors, as the shadows are going to be added with the washes in the next step. So, time for washes. For the skin tones, we're using Reichland Flesh Shade, and we're adding the washes somewhat richly, just making sure that we don't have pools collecting in any of the raised areas. If we do, we just move that around using our brush. For the pants, we're using Athonian Camera Shade.
I gotta do
for
it
the
more
hair,
often,
robes, and beard, we're using
yeah,
Agric
like, see, that looks
Shade.
great.
And
But
always remember, this is one of those
is it
painting
too
steps
watery?
where you
Is
don't
it too
use your
watery? I don't
Kolinsky
know.
brush because the paints can seep back into the brush and break the bristles. For this, you want to use the cheap synthetics. So with the washes dried up, we have brought the miniature to this place. It is now a lot darker, but also messier. And this is one of the negatives using washes and why I maybe don't use them as much in my painting. But I cannot deny the positives. If you just want miniatures painted quickly, you already have something that looks like it's ready for the tabletop at this stage. And we can make it look even better, adding a few layers of highlights.
Thanks, man. Yeah, no,
and that
it
is
looks
what we're
good.
going to do now. We're going to start off by reusing the same colors that we used to add our base coats and placing the highlights. I gotta stop
tripping over it so much and just go for it, you know?
And this is where you finally bring out your fine Kolinsky Sable paintbrush. In this case, Lucas is using the Squidmar Mark I Kolinsky brushes and the size medium. We're still going to use a layer thickness adding the colors. And he's adding that to any flat surface and any surface that is angled upwards. And when you're adding it to muscles, make sure that the highlight is placed all the way up to the edge above it. As an example, check out the pectoral muscle where the highlight is all the way up to the muscle going towards the edge of his shoulder. So that it really feels like the brightest point of each muscle is the one that is placed closest to the light source. We're also going to add a final highlight layer, and we're doing that using the same color again, but then mixing in about 50% of light flesh. And this time we're adding it to the same area as previously, but only going down about 30%, meaning that we leave about 30% of it completely in shadow, the one that we've had with the washes, then 70% of the area with the first highlight, and then about 30% of the area covered with the final highlight. And this will now be repeated on the rest of the miniatures area, on the pants, on the ropes, and on the hair. And you do this until you reach a point of the highlights where you feel happy. If you want to go even brighter, maybe going with clear light flesh as your final highlight, or maybe even adding white or ivory to punch it even a bit more. That is completely up to you, but this is a great base and a nice place to start out. And one thing I think is super important to keep in mind is you don't need to use these exact colors. every paint brands have similar colors that have just a small
Yeah,
marginal
this painting
difference
technique
of
is
the
really
tone.
awesome, but
And it
I
doesn't make
hate
any sense to go out and buy
highlighting.
new
Oh,
paints
yeah, the
every time you
edges.
follow a new tutorial.
Yeah, that's hard,
Just use the
dude.
ones you
It's
have at home
tedious
to start
work,
with,
bro.
and then as you develop as a painter,
Especially
and
when you
keep
got
painting
sausage
more,
fingers
that is
like
the time when
mine,
you
it's hard to
start
get in
buying
there.
more paints to get more tonal variation. Another thing to remember is that whenever you're painting with your Kolinsky brush and want to have a fine tip, make sure that the brush is always moist and refill it with new paint the second it starts drying on your brush. And depending on where you live, that might be more often than you think. But this is the first key to make your brush control a lot better. To highlight the rocks, we're gonna use dry brushing. This is pretty much the opposite of using a wash. We start off by moistening our dry brush. And when using a dry brush, you need to make sure that it's a lot less moist than with a normal paintbrush. Think of it maybe like a 2% moistness. You shouldn't have any water leave the brush when you're using it on a piece of paper or on your hand, but it shouldn't be completely dry. You then stir some of the paint into your brush and then wick most of that paint off on either a piece of cardboard, paper, or pretty much anything that makes the brush dry. Hence the name dry brush.
Hence
now,
the
dry
name
brushing
dry
is
brushing.
perfect for areas like rocks. So we're just gonna
Really
wick the brush
tedious.
on top
Yeah,
of those
dude.
areas, and it is only going to
But
leave
once you
paint
get it
on the
done,
most
it looks so
raised
badass.
areas. And this technique is just perfect for doing
Looks
bases,
amazing when it's
maybe
done.
wood and rocks, anything that's got a lot of texture and is on a slightly larger area. So with that, I think it's time for the first out of 3 grand reveals. So this was the first painting technique out of 3 total that I'm gonna show today, and there are some positives and negatives with this one. The first and positive ones are that these are quite simple techniques, just learning to block in the colors and using a wash. The highlights, on the other hand, obviously requires a little bit more of a practice and control, but it can get you to a nice level.
Go back to
The negatives
other
though,
one.
I'm not a huge fan of the washes, because no matter how
Give it
good you
another
are at using
coat of
washes,
black.
you're giving up a little bit of your control for speed. And another big problem is, if there's an area that you want to repaint during your highlighting steps, it's going to be impossible, because you're firstly going to have to repaint it with the base coat and then add the wash again. Because if you add wash on top of wash, you're gonna have some areas that are even darker and some areas that are bright. So it's a little limiting in my opinion. But now it is time for technique number 2.
I'll keep that in mind. Honestly, I'll probably just rewatch. I'll probably rewatch these videos of techniques and stuff after I get there, or when I get there, I mean.
That is easiest to get something good looking without any previous knowledge at quite a fast pace. And this is the way of contrast. For this, we start out with the Cruel Boys Warhammer miniature, zenithal primed with the black undercoat and then with white from above. Our mission now is pretty much to just block off the colors of the miniature with the contrast paints that fits best with what we're trying to achieve. So for this orc's skin tone, we're using Gut Rip of Flesh to get a nice green soft tone all over. We're using Aldari Emerald for its shield, and as you can see, we're filling it in richly with paint using a larger synthetic brush so that we don't ruin any of our nice brushes. We're using Gorgranta Fur, a dark saturated red-brown to paint all of the brighter leather parts. All wood parts as well as the belt is painted with wildwood. This is the darkest contrast paint you're gonna use. I just love this one so much to block off different colors and get separation between different areas. And when adding these darker colors on top of the brighter one like the Gut Rip of Flesh, make sure that you're really careful with your application. Because if you get this dark brown on top of the green skin, you cannot really go back and add that green again. Because in a similar way like with the washes, the contrast paints mostly are translucent, meaning that if you add the Gut Rip of Flesh on top of this dark brown, you're gonna have the dark brown shining through. But if you had a little bit of bright green leaking to the area that you were going to paint with a dark brown, it doesn't matter as much because the wildwood, as an example, will pretty much fully cover that area. So I always recommend starting with the bright colors first. To give the miniature a little bit of a brighter pop, we're adding Blood Angel's red on the tassel on top of his helmet. The only part that's left to base coat now is the metals, and we're using my favorite metal color, Gunmetal Gray from Vallejo Metal Color. And with that, we have a miniature looking really good. Seriously, only with these base coats, I think the miniature looks tabletop ready. And as opposed to using regular acrylics and washes, we did this with just one coat. In my opinion, it looks better than the 3 first coats with the first technique. But now you're here to learn how to take this to the next level. Just like with our first miniature, we're going to bring out the acrylics to add in highlights. When painting leather and fabric, I really enjoy having some painted texture in there. We're going to start off with an orange brown, deathclaw brown, and stipple in some highlights. Stippling pretty much means you're going to add tiny dots on top of the miniature. We're also going to add a second set of highlights using the same Deathclaw brown, but mixing that 50-50 with light flesh and focusing this highlight mainly on the edges of the areas and on the most top parts. Now let's move on to the skin. We're mixing moot green with light flesh about 60-40, starting out using the same highlight technique as we did on our first miniature, every angled upwards towards the sky or a flat surface. Once the first highlight layer is added, we'll bring out our second highlight, mixing it about 30-70
Okay, good.
So
Thanks,
about
man.
twice as
I'm glad
much
somebody's
light
paying
flesh as we
attention.
did with the first layer. Adding this to the same areas, but a slightly smaller surface compared to the first layer.
Sorry, sometimes I read messages a second time. I just don't want to. I don't like it when I accidentally skip one.
We make sure to add more of the highlight around the face than we do, for example, on the bottom of his torso. Now we're just going to add the final highlights to the rest of the parts as well.
Timmy, what's up, buddy? How are you, bro?
We're doing it on the shield and the helmet.
We're almost done
Japanese
painting. We're just about to wrap it up. But you got here right towards the end, my dude. I hope you're doing good. I hope you're chilling.
Washing the spear with Nuln Oil to just bring out some shadowy contrast on the steel. And finally, it's time for the final details on this Mini. That is just going to bring everything together and make it worth for people to pick up the Mini and see what you've actually done with it. We're going to highlight the steel with the metal color silver, using the edge of our brush and just adding it to the edge of the spear, and painting the eyes with a super nicely tipped Kolinsky brush, just using some ivory and adding a dot of black on one of the sides. And with that, guys, it is time for our second grand reveal. This is definitely my favorite beginner technique because of the fact that your miniature is going to look pretty much amazing just using the contrast paints.
Bro. We're
if you
doing
then
all
feel
right.
brave enough to add in highlights with acrylics, you're going to have something high-end after a very short amount of time once you actually learn to control your brushwork. But we have one more painting technique to show you guys. And this is the one that I use the most, together maybe with some contrast paints depending on which paint job I'm doing. We started this paint job off just with a black Space Marine and then primed it using a blue spray can primer. We're now going to add in highlight layers, mixing colors in different steps. And this is the technique to use if you want to have full control of where you place the highlights and to not get any blotchy areas that you might get with contrast paints or washes. And to get the highlights and shadows exactly where we want them and getting smooth transitions, we're going to mix every step of each highlight together with the previous color. We start off with a blue, mixing that with a little bit of turquoise.
I knew this dude that used to do this stuff, and it was pretty impressive, some of the techniques to like make them look real. Yeah, dude. Yeah, some of this stuff is really
insane. We're then going to add the second highlight using a clean turquoise, and then adding more light flesh as we go. And I'm not going to get into the deep details on where to place the highlights and exactly how to use the brush to control it to get the best blends. You should consider this more as a demonstration of what you can do once you've mastered the control of your brush. Because as we work our way up from the darkest color to our brightest highlight, we can control how much light we want on each of the areas, and we're also going to get a very painterly, almost hyper-realistic style.
I like hyper-realistic.
The biggest problem with this technique, working our way from the darkest color to the brightest in layer upon layer, it is that it takes a lot more time. So maybe this is not something that you do if you're going to paint an army of 100 Space Marines, but more if you're just going to paint one miniature for display or for a competition, or maybe it's that one hero that you're using in your role-playing campaign that you want with the perfect paint scheme. This is also a technique that requires a lot of control, both in your brush, but also in knowledge of where to place the highlights. But guys, I think it's time to finally show you how all of these 3 miniatures look together and how the different end results look between the different techniques. Wild. Time for the third grand review.
That's so cool, dude. So unique. Yes, buddy. What do you want, buddy? My cat, he's probably hungry. That guy has no fill, dude. My cat. And he's like, he's caught on to the game too,
and the
bro.
last thing that I'm going to show you guys today is how to make simple bases to go with these miniatures. There are tons of different ways of making miniature bases.
To go
I have
get into
miniatures
his sister's
where I've
food.
spent probably more time making the bases than I have painting the miniatures. But for this specific paint job, when you're painting your first mini, you want to keep it simple. And the 2 most easy ways to make miniature bases is 1, using sand and glue. You can either use PVA glue or super glue. Remember to use fine sand, because if you use 2 big pieces of rock, it's not going to look scaled proper, meaning that they're going to look like huge boulders instead of fine sand.
Except for the places that I came out the lines, it looks pretty good, you guys.
Paint it with a dark color as a base tone, and then dry brush with a slightly brighter neutral color. So if you want brown sand, maybe start with a dark brown and then highlight it with a beige. If you want it to look like more gray rocks, start with black and dry brush with the gray. To top this off, I like buying a set of miniature grass tufts, and these just add so much life to the bases. Just gluing 1 or 2 of these, or maybe 3 in place of the base, is going to make a huge difference. Or if you want to go nuts, just fill the entire base with grass tufts and you got a nice meadow. But there are easier ways of making bases. There is something called basing textures or texture paints. Many different brands make these, but my favorite is from Vallejo. These come in many different sizes and colors. You just pick the one that you like the most. It contains of pretty much just an acrylic medium, a color, and sand. So once you put this in place using a spatula, don't use your expensive brushes, because they're gonna get messed up. Once this have dried, you can pretty much just dry brush them with a brighter color and you're done. And you saved yourself the gluing and finding sand step. It's just the base texture and
thanks, bro. Yeah, dude. It's
so guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, that you learned something. If you did, don't forget to subscribe.
Maybe we'll
also
do like
recommendation, once you feel ready for it, check out this week's sponsor,
so like I said, I want to do painting like during my watch parties, but
amazing. As I said, I even purchased them myself.
I gotta figure it out. We're still working things out.
Never thought about using a different brand.
We got a better setup this time.
You can check out our Patreon.
Maybe pledge $1
to see how it goes. All of these amazing people. No pressure at all, but if you can help, we deeply appreciate it. And with that said, have a great day, everyone. Bye bye.
Dampness of the brush leaves different effects. Yeah, dude. It's hard to like recreate something when it comes out nice and then you want to do it again. It's like, well, how wet was it? How much paint did I have on it? Yeah, not too sure. Let's just feel it out. So eventually, after enough repetition, we'll get better about it. Toss a little music on. But I always asked him, why did he put the brush into the paint and brush it on the towel? Yeah, just so hair thickness. A drop of paint. Just a drop of paint. Yeah. That's a good. Oh, we got one. We got one right here. Right. I just gotta like bend down and grab it. I haven't gotten there to mixing up my paints yet. And I haven't gotten crazy with it. I mean, I guess I should for the mixing of the water with my paint, but it's on the wet palette, so it's not like I can really measure exactly how much water is going into it. But we're getting the feel of it so far. Write down things that did, which yeah, exactly. Step 1, please go. Step 2, do it. Okay, yeah. You know, that's not a bad idea. Yeah, we should probably do that. At least get into the habit of doing something like that, and at least until we get the feel of it, where I don't need to look at the cheat sheet anymore. You know what I mean? Alright, dude, it looks good, except for maybe that one little spot of the claw. No, it looks good, actually. It does look good, but we're just gonna do one more little spot on it. Just on the claw, right? Yeah, dude. We're gonna wrap it up right here in a sec. We did it, you guys. We kicked some 40K painting ass. Looks all right. It's doing good. The black is on there. The purple is on there. The Wraith Bone White is on there. And we did it. We did 2 of them, you guys. How many hours? 2.5 hours. We got 2 of them done. Except for like the details of where I came out the lines. We'll fix that out on the next one. So yeah, eventually you would only need to reference it when you were going to recreate it after a few months, years of not doing that style scheme. Yeah, exactly. Or expand an army to make additionals not stand out. Oh yeah, dude. Like, if I want to add to that army years later or something. Yeah, a whole different shade off. Don't want that. I spent hours, watched the same dude spend thousands of hours playing Ocarina of Time and Final Fantasy. He was like my first introduction to that type of stuff. Nice, dude. That's awesome, bro. Ocarina of Time is a great game. A lot of fun too. It's got a lot of good replay value. I mean, not really, but kind of, especially if you got nostalgia towards something like that. It's looking awesome, man. Thanks, bro. I appreciate it. G, looking good. It's passing my. Oh, sorry. I gotta get the frame of view better with this camera. It'll never look great and amazing in my eyes because I painted it and I can see every little thing that needs work, but I appreciate you guys. Just like any of those other good ones that you see, I bet you the guy that painted them's just like, yeah, except I messed up there, and there. It's like, gee, I don't even see that. What are you talking about? Where is it? Oh, thanks, dude. Yeah, I'm down to play too. I'm still learning, but I'm down to give it a shot of playing. And maybe we'll do like a virtual play where I'll put the mat out over here, and you know, somebody will be my rival, and either you get your own dice and spin them over there, and I'll take your word for it, or I'll spin the dice over here, and you just be the observer, but with your name on it, I guess, or something. We'll figure it out. We'll do something cool. Those are battle ready. Thanks. Yeah, we're on our worst critics. Yeah, dude, for sure. I knew the entire game and all the secrets before I ever had even picked up the controller. He was a great friend. Damn, dude, that's dope. You should stream some Ocarina of Time, man. Do it. Get on it. Play some. People would be stoked to watch. Even today. If you stream it, I'll watch it. I like Ocarina of Time. I want to replay it one day. Sometimes we just need a different person's perspective. Yeah, dude. I appreciate that. Thank you. And a boost of confidence from the homies from time to time is also very appreciated. Thank you, guys. I'm streaming right now. Oh, snap. Timmy, where you at, dog? Alright. We're gonna wrap it up right here, and yeah, I'll stop by your chat. Thanks, dude. Been live for 71 hours. Damn, son. That's a good minute. Good minute. All right, you guys. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for being here. These guys are done. We're just gonna. They're pretty much done drying here. We're gonna put them away. We've got 6. We've got 6 done. This is the 7th and the 8th one that are now complete. We got, I guess, 2 more, and then the Ripper Swarm, and then we're gonna be moving on to the Space Marines. Hopefully, my skills will be a little bit better and polished off by then, and we'll keep the mistakes to a minimum when we do the Space Marine. Okay, I'm gonna check that out for sure. Righto, see you all next time. Kuroshito, thank you, man. I will see you on the next one. We can get a quick group shot of the NIDS. Yeah. A group shot of the NIDS for sure. Group shot of the NIDS. Buddy. Yeah, boy. Let's see, what's the best way to get you that shot? Is that a good shot? No, let me grab the other camera. I'm like a thinker and I write stories and talk about like ideas. Yeah, that's down, dude. Creativity is where it's at. And most times I'm watching a movie while also listening to music. Nice, dude. And broadcasting yourself. That's what I like to hear. Making it much so great, so well, at least I enjoy it. Bro, it's all about enjoying. As long as you're having a good time, that's what it's all about. I lost my spot. Quick idea, you can do commonly post on your progress as well. I should do that. Thanks, dude. I'm way down. I'm gonna do that. I'm down for the advice. Definitely I should do that. I'm gonna take pictures of these guys right now and I'll start posting them. Just to show people who missed the stream. Yeah. They look awesome together like that. Thanks, dude. Kinda like the videos on my channel. Oh yeah, great job on the consistency. Thanks, dude. With movies. Yeah, buddy. This is the camera that we're using right now. It's just a phone on a tripod. This thing. Looking pretty good. Music with movies. That's down, dude. I'll definitely subscribe or follow here on Twitch. Yeah, there's no huge discrepancy on the first mini and the last one, so I'd say you're doing awesome. Thanks, man. Yeah, no, you can't even really tell. I know it's the last two over here that are the ones that we just did, but they all look good. I haven't mixed any paints. I haven't like lightened anything up or darkened any, because you know how they say like get the base paint, the original color, and then add a little dark to one and then a little light to the other one. That way you can like do contrasts and stuff. I haven't touched any of that stuff, so we're getting there. We're figuring it out. We're doing it nice and slow. Easy wins the race. Thank you, you guys. All those baby Godzillas, yeah, dude. Little baby Godzillas with guns. Yeah, for shadows and highlights. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I haven't even gotten there yet. But we will. This is just me dipping a toe into the 40K. Yeah, buddy. The dude I used to watch, dude. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Yeah, no, that's good. I primered these also, but it's good to have like a black primer and then a white primer and do that. What's that thing called again, Kudashito, where you do the black and white? Well, it's like you do it all black, and then wherever the light's coming from, you spray it with white, just so you see where it's going to be hit by light. And that way, when you paint there, you know where the highlights are going. It'll come through. There you go. Thank you, Kudashito. Zenithal painting, Zenithal primering, Zenithal tone. That was back when all the figures was metal. Oh, metal figures. Yeah. Definitely need a primer metal figures for sure. Just find your painting style. Yeah, dude. Don't need to exactly copy someone. Nope. Yeah, we're trying all the different styles, and then we're gonna start mixing styles, and then we'll see whatever I like the most, what feels good to me and looks good in my eyes, I guess. Yeah, exactly. But once you've gotten your own painting style, that's when you get the most fun, I reckon. Nice. Yeah, no, I'm down. Yeah, I was watching that Eons of Battle guy. He said that he likes painting them more than putting them together. So like when he's putting an army together, he's like building them, and he's like, oh, this is boring. Or he said something like I don't like doing this. Oh, boring. And I was all, bro, you poor guy. He just has to get to the finished building them so he can do the fun, what he has enjoyment most of. But I had fun doing all of it, dude. Building them was dope. Painting them's dope. Chatting with you guys is dope. We're doing all right. We're doing good. I'm having a good time. I'm happy. It's putting a smile on my face. So we're doing all right. Building to me is the most exciting part. Yeah, dude. Yeah, it's both just as exciting. But actually, I'm finding myself kind of thinking like, damn, I wish I could build one, put one together. I should have like put a couple together, painted them, put a couple more together, painted them, put a couple more together, but I have nothing to build now. But yeah, no, when we get our next set, that's what we'll do. We'll build a couple, paint them, and build a couple, and we'll do it like that. That way it's not just set on one. But it was nice also painting a whole bunch of them in a row, like one color, and then the next time painting that whole bunch of different color, and we're trying it all different ways. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. Like watching those small plastic stuff turn into something that you build. Yeah, dude, it's like, I mean, I don't want to compare it to like people that engineer and like really invent things. This is like advanced Legos to me, I guess. Like what's the box say on it for ages like 12 and up? Yeah, that's where I feel about right there. No, like it feels a little bit cooler than Legos, but easier than engineering, you know? Something crazy. Yeah, painting just gives them life, if you get what I'm saying. It does, dude. You're creating something. It's art. You're giving them life by giving them, and you're putting your own life into them, kind of, by when you do your own style and your own themed colors, and dude, they're yours. Wild. Great. I love it. Baking bread, I guess. Yeah, dude, like people that cook, the alchemy that is in cooking, bro, like making one thing into another, adding a couple spices, doing it just right, waiting for it to boil, waiting for it to bake, waiting for it to rise just right before you do anything else to it. And you know, you got to do it that right way. If you mess it up a little bit, you might not end up with what you're trying to make. And yeah, dude, it's not as complicated as that, I guess, but like, I feel like I'm doing something. I can't cook worth a crap, so you know, doing something like this is like, oh, I feel like I can do something. I'm not completely useless. You know what I mean? You can make a stop motion picture. Yeah, dude, I've actually I've been watching a YouTuber make little clips of stop motion stuff, and it looks pretty cool. It looks interesting. I might give it a shot one day, but yeah, we're just doing what we enjoy. We're just taking a ride together, I guess. Flour, egg, yeast, etc. Yeah, dude, it turns into something you made. Yeah, bro. Exactly. But anyone who is reading this, be proud of whatever you're making. Yeah, bro, for real. Be proud of your thing. It's your thing. You made it. You put it together. You know, Games Workshop might have like put the bits and pieces in a little box for you, but you made it into what it is. Whether it's a mini or content or whatever. Yeah, exactly. I can confirm my dog thinks I'm a magician. Hell yeah, dude. When you like hide something in one hand and disappear it and show him your hand and you go, oh. I love that. Be proud of it. It's literally part of you. Exactly, dude. Exactly. It's got your own piece to it. Part of your soul. Horcrux yourself around into your art. I show him a potato and he wants none of that. I turn the potato into fries. He's all for that stuff. Hell yeah, dude. Love animals, bro. In fact, I hear a little bell. I don't know where he went though. I with my cat. All right, you guys. We're gonna wrap it up right here. I appreciate you guys for hanging out and watching me paint and giving me some advice on the hobby. So yeah, dude, I appreciate you guys. Thank you guys for chilling. See you, buddy. Lols. Later, Kudishito. Timmy plays. Tommy plays. Everybody that was here, all the lurkers also, thank you guys for being here. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening. Thank you too, bro. I will catch you guys soon on the next one. Tomorrow we got some Stargate SG-1 watch party that we're going to be doing. Probably 3 episodes of Stargate SG-1. We're in season 3. We're going to be doing that. Thursday will probably be a day for Buddy. I'll just be hanging out. Friday and Saturday we got movies. We got I think we're going to watch Ongabach 2 on Friday. Not too sure about Saturday. And Sunday will be a day for Buddy again. Monday, Monster Mondays will be back, and then Tuesdays we'll continue the painting with the 40K. All right, you guys, I will catch you guys on the next one. I appreciate you guys. Peace.